Covering the same things, and there's a certain camaraderie associated with doing that thing. Myron, a couple times, would pick me up in the parking lot of the Bob Evans in Cranberry and drive to Cleveland for the Steelers-Browns game. And that was a tremendously harrowing experience. Because, Myron was in the, this is an adjective that's kind of gone out of style, but Myron was diminutive. In other words, he was a short guy. He was a very small guy. And he drove enormous cars, like he would be driving around in these Crown Victorias that he could barely see over the wheel of. And, to go with him to Cleveland in a rainstorm, that was high-end drama all the way there. And then when you got there, and you walked into a hotel full of Steelers fans with Myron on Saturday night, I mean, you could not have walked in there with Beyonce and created any more of a stir. I mean, it was crazy. I remember, saying to him, "Okay, Myron, I'll see you in the bar later if you get there." But all of that personality came out in Myron's writing. That's what I think made him a success.
Gene,
I was going to say, there's a certain romance for me with old-time writers and what they got to do. You mentioned the trip on the train with Cassius Clay. He was afraid to fly. So Myron got to go to, I think, back to Louisville from where he was training in Florida. I don't remember the exact details. And in this day and age, the way, I don't know what the newspaper business is like compared to radio. We're rushed through everything. We never have any time to spend a couple of days in a sleeper berth on a train with Muhammad Ali and get to know the guy. I think of Myron in a trench coat with the cigarette and the toddy in a bygone era when, you had drinks in the press box while you were covering games.
I have a couple of print things to mention, but first, Gene jogged my memory there. In training camp, we would all work hard during the day, and they had two-a-days, and Myron was there a lot. I mean, even though he wasn't, the beat guy or anything, he was the radio color man, and he was there a lot, and had a room in the dorm with the rest of us. We all stayed where the players stayed, no air conditioning and that kind of thing. But at night, we'd go out. We weren't sticking around in that stupid unair-conditioned dorm. And we used to go to this place called Pete's on Route 30. And when it closed, we were looking for another place. And we found this place in the smallest town in Westmoreland County named Youngwood. Not Youngstown, not Youngwood. And Gene was with me, and Myron was with us. And we found this place. It was the first time we were there, and it had
I'm going to deny everything Ed says after this point.
It had 3 levels of bars there, believe it or not, and the one down in the basement. It was almost like a biker bar. We went down in there, and it was crowded, and Cope wound up. I call him Cope because he called me Bouchette. Cope wound up calling it the Rathskeller. So our first time in there, nobody knew who we are. It's dark and everything else. And all of a sudden, heads started snapping. You'd see all these people, and they'd start whispering, "There's Cope, there's Cope, that's Myron Cope." Eventually, they got him a chair and sat him down so he could autograph. People would come up to him. There was a line in this bar, this Rathskeller. And one person came up to him and said, "Myron," he said, I got your autograph years ago. Myron goes, okay. And he goes, it'd be worth something now if you were dead. Cope says, I'm sorry I couldn't accommodate you. And Gene, while all this is going on, Gene's calling out, hey, Cope is right there and everybody's around him. Pope Paul is over here. Don't you want to see Pope Paul? Ronald Reagan is over here. Don't you want to see the former president? No, they didn't. They wanted to see Myron. And I'll continue. As part of his writing, you know how good a writer he is by what these two guys have said, but he didn't like it when things slowed down, when you would read and it would slow things down. And one of the things he hated was those parentheses they put in. Like if there's a quote, if I'm talking about Tom McMillan, I just say McMillan, and it appears in the paper for the first time, they would put in parentheses his first name, Tom. But they do take it to ridiculous extents now, editors do, and I think that's one reason Cope left writing was the editors. But he says, why don't you guys use nicknames anymore? You know, he was big on nicknames, and of course, if we use nicknames, they'd take them out of the paper, and I try to tell them that. They don't allow that anymore. You know, Red Smith wouldn't be called Red Smith today. I once had in the paper, it was a Steeler 15 years ago named Ziggy Hood. Everybody knew him as Ziggy. I wrote Ziggy Hood, and it wasn't the first time. It was probably 5 years in, and some editor changed it to, what was his name? Evander. Evander Hood, it came out. Everybody's going, who's this Evander guy? And Myron also, just to get a little more technical, he once said to me, he says, why don't you put said McMillan instead of having the quote in, and then in the midway through you go, said McMillan, and you have to wait and read that whole quote to find out who it was. He was while he was a great writer, he wanted to make it as simple for the reader as possible.
And he would say that, and so you'd go back and look at his stories, and that's the way he wrote. Like some people would tell you that, but it was amazing and kind of eye-opening to see that when he would give you advice. And there was nothing like getting a compliment from Cope on your writing, which he didn't throw around a lot. So it wasn't like every story was great, but when he said that he liked something, it was more important than anybody else. And then you could also, as Ed said, because we've all complained about editors. I'm retired, I still complain about editors. But I do think that's why Myron probably left. Because he went from the Pitt News to the Erie Times to the Post-Gazette, and he outgrew the Post-Gazette. And I was just reading some pieces preparing for today, and Roy McHugh, who Gene referenced, said, Cope wrote magazine-style writing in the newspaper, and nobody did it back then. It was almost too much. But he had enough confidence and gumption just to leave and become a freelance writer. And then one day, we'll get into this later panels, there was no goal to be a broadcaster. I think WTA one day, for all of you students out there, quirks of fate happened. Somebody asked Myron to fill in or do a commentary on the air, and it led to everything else. If he had said no, that doesn't happen. We've been deprived of all that.
Well, Ed, you talked about him always being at Steeler camp. I think the one thing, you think of him as this bigger-than-life character, and that it just flowed off his tongue using Yiddish words. He worked hard at his craft. Tom, you were being a hockey guy most of your life, and hockey was always lower on his totem pole than a lot of sports, but I remember distinctly him coming to the Civic Arena after his talk show. He'd get there in the second period.
And
they would have a sandwich for him.
Even
though he didn't love the game, he would come because he wanted to know what was going on.
He couldn't get there at the start, and he would do that. That's the memory, too.
I think even you aspiring writers out there now, I think that's the biggest thing with it. It's hard work. I'm sure you guys, and I wrote for the Trib for 17 years, a weekly column. I started at $75 a column. I ended at $75 a column. Once I tried to get it up to 100, but the reason I did it was because a lot of people think radio and TV guys can't write. And I just did it for my own, but that was the most blood-sweating time of my week, trying to come up with one column, let alone three.
And don't think he started out writing either for the Post-Gazette or Sports Illustrated. he told me the stories many times how he started writing up in Erie Times.
Yeah.
Is that it, Tom? And had to write about bowling. The bowling scores had come in, and he'd have to write a couple paragraphs on them. Put the bowling scores in the paper. So, any of you out there who think it's you're going straight to Sports Illustrated, well, that's not even there anymore practically.
Well, Tom, you mentioned the
You start
Cosell
low.
piece.
You can start low and finish high.
I think the 75th anniversary of Sports Illustrated, that was one of their top 50 pieces of all time. Yeah.
50th. It was one of the top 50. And to many people in Pittsburgh, that was the first time they knew Myron was a writer. That he had written one of the best 50 stories in the first 50 years of Sports Illustrated. And again, for you students out there, it exists now. It was huge back in our day. It was the Bible of sports. That's what you aspired to do. And to think that Cope had written it. And it would always, the juxtaposition for a while never made sense to me, how he would purposely mangle the language on his show. He sounded like, to use a word that he always used, a dumbcough. And he wanted to be in double yoy and okle dokle. He would use these, you'd sit listening to him, waiting for him. And then to hear that, to hear what worked so well as being a character on the radio, and then to read this magnificent prose, it was like it was two different people. And his daughter Elizabeth is going to speak later. I'm sure he'll talk about what he was like at home. But he had the ability to transition, which none of the rest of us have. Maybe Gene, but none of the rest of us.
Well, the one thing the rest of you guys do have, though, and in modern things that I hated right before I retired, is the only time they were really interested in sports anymore is if some guy got a DUI or beat up his wife, or regular scores, highlights, sports stories. They weren't interested in. And you three guys have all been able to incorporate humor, I think, into your writing and in your on-air work, and that was what really worked for Myron. He was funny. He was funny whether he was writing. He was funny whether he was on the air. And his philosophy of sports is the toy shop of the newsroom. I think today we take it with, of course there's 24-hour-a-day sports talk, and some of it's just, you think you're talking about the start of a war.
But underlying, he took it seriously, but talked about it as though it was fun. It wasn't just superfluous. It wasn't just funny to him the way he presented it. He did the work, which I think comes from his foundation as a writer and a reporter. He knew how to do that. He was ahead of all the other broadcast guys because he had that part of his resume.
Gene, do you think you could get Mina Birds into the Steeler locker room today if you tried?
Myron, I think, if you're a student of writing or a student of communications in any way, you have to remember that you are, no matter how you feel about your own abilities, you have every right to your own confidence. And that's the way Myron was. He was a very confident person in everything he did. He didn't think he was a broadcaster, certainly, but when you heard him on the radio, he had 100% confidence in everything he did. I don't know, Elizabeth will speak to this later. I don't know exactly where that comes from, whether it's his parents or what. He told me one time that he played baseball as a kid with Gene Kelly. I don't know. I mean, if I play baseball with Gene Kelly and then Gene Kelly goes to Hollywood and stars in a movie with Debbie Reynolds and does Singing in the Rain, does that help my confidence? I think it does, but there's no explaining it. But I'm just telling you, as a young person, you are 100% entitled to your own confidence and to go about things with confidence, no matter how you really feel about your ability. Tom mentioned, and Guy mentioned too, about Myron writing with humor. That's another really tricky thing. But if you think you're funny, try it. Try it until somebody tells you to stop. Just do it and be confident about it. That's the way Myron was. When he had his show, Myron's talk show was just a huge thing in Pittsburgh. It was just for some perspective, it was on when I came to Pittsburgh for 30 minutes. Now everybody's talk show is 4 hours, right? But it was 30 minutes, and on the occasion that Myron's talk show was expanding to 1 hour, that was a huge deal too. People would talk about, what is he going to talk about for an hour? But when Myron did it, it was such a huge deal. And I was here about a year or two, and he had me as a guest. I mean, I was like the main guest on Myron's show. I mean, I couldn't believe it. It was like finding out you were an astronaut. But I walked in there, and my big fear was not what I was going to say. It was more, who is going to call this show to talk to me? So right in the couple minutes before the show was to start, I'm sitting there with Myron, across the board, and he's smoking and getting his papers in order, and he looks at the board and he says to me, "See, they're calling. It's buzzing away like it normally does." And that was his way of saying to me, "I know you think you don't belong here, but it'll be fine. Don't worry, it'll be fine."
And that was before cell phones.
Yeah, right.
People had to call from home.
People had to call from home,
Right.
or stop and use a payphone, which they did.
Well, the transition, one thing that Myron would like to do occasionally is do something outside of sports to rein himself back in. And you guys have all, I mentioned, Tom, some of the books you've written, Civil War, Flight 93. Ed, you've written books. Gene, you've written a play. You do stand-up comedy. He was so pigeonholed by the time it was the end of his career as being a talk show host. We've already discussed how he was kind of forgotten as a writer, unless you were an old. Talk about that a little bit. And everyone thinks that loves sports thinks that being around it all the time is the greatest thing, I think, and until you're around it all the time.
Well, I'll tell a personal story. When I was just starting out, the Vietnam War was winding down. It was 1975, and they were getting as many of the communists were taking over Vietnam, and they were taking as many of their loyalists, Americans' loyalists, because the communists were going to do God knows what to those people. And you could see the helicopters being overloaded and everything else. And anyway, they put them at Indiantown Gap, which is out near where I grew up in Lebanon County. And I actually worked there for 3 summers. So I said to my paper, the Indiana Gazette, can I go out and do a story on it? And I went out with my new camera and took pictures, and I had a captain escorted me around, and did a front page story with photos on these people coming through, these Vietnam refugees coming through. And I'll never forget, I did a sports column out of it too, because they were introducing some of them, the Cambodians, to football. And I went over and I see these Cambodians going, hike. It was like the first American word, if it's a word even, that they knew. So that was my one kind of non-sports thing that I did once.
Tom, your
Yeah, I mean, there definitely has to be a balance. I think people don't understand that when you work in sports, you're not the fan consuming it that way. I always found, as much as I loved it, I needed something else. For me, that was history, and then post career, I am now writing about history, so it kind of worked out really well. But I think that's important too. But also to experiment, to use Myron's career as an example, even within your profession, to experiment doing different things, even writing. There are people who can be great newspaper columnists, but they couldn't write a book. They couldn't write to that length. They couldn't write a play the way Gene did. There are people who could be on the air, but maybe be a little funny, but they can't do stand-up comedy. So for the confidence factor, Gene, too, you have to try those things. You don't know if you're going to be good at them. We've all tried things that we were failures at, and we don't mention those anymore, but there are things that you find out you can do. But there are different styles within. Every writer cannot be a beat reporter to cover a team. A columnist sometimes can't do that. So Myron kind of found his way. He probably could have done it all, but he found his way by trying different things.
Yeah, he did. I mean, he was so, Myron was so informed. I mean, he read newspapers, not the sports section, but cover to cover. He could really talk about anything, and he could write about anything. He just happened to focus on sports. But Myron was, one of the few people who could talk to Chuck Noll about all the things Noll didn't want to talk about football for. I mean, he could carry on any kind of conversation.
Could there be a Myron today, even if there was a guy? I mean, there are a lot of people that have shtick. There are a lot of people that have knowledge, the ability to have both, and also be allowed to, I mean, some of the things, I tried to do commentaries, tried to talk the news director into commentaries in recent years at Channel 4. They don't want that anymore. And they don't want you to step on anybody's toes or say anything wrong. I mean, is he something that we'll never see again?
I mean, I think it's like comparing athletes from eras. Myron would have adjusted. Could he have been the Myron of the 70s today? No, that doesn't work.
Yeah, you look at people today, Tom, that cover things, and they've got to take the pictures. Some of the smaller TV stations, they've got to shoot the interview. They have to write the website. There's a lot of people couldn't do all that. He was a guy 50 years ago could have done all that.
In the 4-hour show. He did max a 1-hour show. But the great ones would have figured it out. I'm glad we had him when we did, because he still would have been great, but I'm glad we had that. And I just think it's hard. These guys have tried to say it's hard to put into words how impactful that show was at a time. Now there's so much, we've talked 24/7. There was one sports show in Pittsburgh. That was it. You waited all day for the Myron Cope show to come on, and you couldn't wait if it was a guest. We had a hockey player on. I was so excited. And he kind of gave you, your marching orders for the next day on sports. That you couldn't be that now, but I do think he would have easily adapted to whatever the situation.
When I went to the Post Gazette, it was '83, and the Walkman was big, and I'd walk over the park over in Plum, and I'd listen to Cope on a Walkman because I didn't want to miss him, and I would pick up stuff from his show, and I'd call my bosses at the Post Gazette and say, "Hey, did you know this?" And they go, "No." So, he would drop some little birdies, as he called them, on us, and he taught me, to listen, because you never knew what you were going to hear, and he didn't go as they do today, 24/7, bashing the Steelers' offensive coordinator.
Right.
Yeah, Guy, just to go back to your question, I mean, I think somebody like Myron can happen again today. It'll just take the right set of circumstances and the right person. All those things are still possible, but it is amazing when you think about it. Myron died 15 years ago this week, and here we are talking about him. There's nobody like him. There's no replacement for him, but something like that could happen, sure.
He'd be tickled that we're doing this on President's Day. He'd do his commentary tonight with a stovetop hat or a powdered wig or something.
There will be nobody, though, doing Denver Broncos, they're just Yonkos on TV, I can tell you that.
Oh, it was a big deal when he would shoot the Christmas Carol every year and the whole crew would come in. Do we have any questions from the audience for our esteemed panel here? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was definitely part of Myron's appeal, and I think that observation about Pittsburgh is correct. We're not really enamored with people who set themselves apart. I mean, we will worship to the extent that that's the right verb. People like Clemente and Lemieux, and we're glad to have them, but we don't identify with people like that as much as people like Myron.
I think I was a Tom Bender fan back when I was a kid listening to Tom, and Myron replaced him. And I remember one of the first things that struck me was when he said, "It's a wash day edition." My mother did laundry every Monday. And I almost felt like he was talking to me, even though I guess that was the thing at the time. All housewives did laundry on Monday. And I'm like, "Oh, wash day, he knows my mother does laundry today." All those kinds of things, and people that would drive through here from other places didn't get it, and maybe he wouldn't have worked in Bill Curry left and went to Philadelphia, and it didn't work, but he was perfect for here.
I mentioned nicknames before, how he loved nicknames, and bemoaned the fact they weren't being used as much anymore. There was an obituary recently about an old Steeler who, I think he was here a year. He was here for a cup of coffee, but people wrote about him in an obituary when he died for this one very reason. His name was Jack Delaplane, and Cope gave him the nickname Hydroplane because in a preseason game in Philadelphia, it was raining like crazy on the artificial turf, and he went at one point, he had a good game as Jack Delaplane. He was a rookie, and he went sliding on this turf, and Cope on the air called him Jack Hydroplane Delaplane, and that nickname stuck forever. Long after he died, they used it.
Even the
Otherwise,
callers to
nobody
his
would have
show,
ever heard of him.
all his show callers, Sarcastic Sword, and they all had nicknames calling into the show. Any other questions? Sally.
Hi, Sally. Thank you, Sally.
My wife's birthday's next month. She said the only gift she wants is for me to shave, so I probably will.
He probably could have, but I think going back to it, there was that authenticity to Pittsburgh that I don't know if that could translate. Yeah, and I think there's some. We've seen that with some of our. Mike Lang didn't go anywhere else. Bob Prince didn't go anywhere. Now maybe they could have, but they were perfect here, and maybe sometimes too. I don't know that there was an aspiration because you fit here. I do think, though, as I said earlier, Myron would have adjusted to the modern times. He probably would have hated social media, but he would have adjusted, and maybe because of the way it is, it would have worked. It would have been hard to replace that local authenticity that he loved and his audience loved.
If he grew up in another market, and I'm not smart enough to know all these other markets. Guy mentioned Bill Cardell, a lot of you people never heard of, but he tried to bring that stick to Philadelphia, and it didn't work at all.
Oh, Bill Curry, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Bill Cardell was the movie guy. But I think if Myron, let's just say Myron grew up in Philadelphia and started out doing stuff the way he did here, and the Eagles were Super Bowl champs, and everything could have worked. They've had some characters there.
He would have used Jersey types, Philly slang, and endeared himself to those folks. Yeah.
Yeah, but he would have had I think the fact he was born here, grew up here, authenticated a lot of that.
I think Myron could have been a writer in any market,
Oh, yeah.
obviously, but the voice. I don't know enough about broadcasting to say this with any authority, but broadcast voices seem universally homogenized. Everybody's from nowhere, and mine's definitely from Pittsburgh. I don't know how that would have worked.
Anybody else? Yes.
I think under all of this, it was how hard he worked. Like you saw his personality, you thought it came natural, and he was this character, and he was a great writer, but it didn't just happen. And you could see, I think the fans never got to see that. That was the gift that we got to see. You got to see him work. You had drinks with him, you had fun with him, you heard him tell his stories. That was great. You're on the road with him. But to see his work ethic, and to him, as a talk show guy back then, showing up at Steeler camp almost every day, and you want to emulate the people who were very successful in your field, but learn why they got there. I couldn't write like Cope, and I couldn't talk like Cope, but maybe I could work as hard as Cope. And I think that's what I took from him.
This is going to sound simple, but to observe. A lot of journalists don't observe enough, and especially you need, well, I shouldn't say especially in sports, but in sports, you can pick up on all kinds of things that don't seem very big. Like I'm trying to think of how people maybe just jump on one major thing, whereas there may be something else going on over here that could be more interesting. That's because he was big on that, and he was big on interacting with people. You have to, as a journalist, especially sports, when you're dealing with the same people all the time, you have to get to know them. You have to talk to them. You have to not come in as the hard ass and just looking for a news story all the time, or just looking for a quote that you could throw in a story. You have to interact with people, and I think that's what he taught me.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm going to take away too. I mentioned before, just what, here we are 15 years later, we're still talking about Myron. That's the kind of presence he had. When I started, I started working in Philadelphia, and I was fortunate to cover a lot of great superstar athletes there, Julius Erving, Pete Rose, people like that, people who were actually good at being superstars because they just knew how to handle it. And when I came to Pittsburgh, the biggest superstar here was Myron Cope. And he, as I described before, that scene of getting to the hotel in Cleveland with Beyonce or Myron Cope, I've neglected to say that Myron handled those situations so beautifully. He was so gracious and nice to people. And that's what that's one of the things I'll always remember about him, is just how gracious and nice he was to everybody. And that's, that's what I wanted to emulate, and I can tell you with authority I'm not that nice.
He had opinions, but they were backed by facts or things that, there's too many people in the media today that have opinions that are unfounded. Too many people doing talk shows that never set foot in a locker room and have to go face to face with a coach or a player that they call. It's okay to say something negative about him, but Myron would be right in that guy, and Myron would be the first to admit if he was wrong and go apologize. I think there was a story in his book about he was ripping Tommy Maddox for an interception that he threw in a game one time, and then I think it was Tunch pointed out to him, but there was a 40-mile-an-hour wind or something, and he went up to Tommy Maddox in the locker room afterward and says, "I ripped you on the game broadcast the other day, and I shouldn't have." I mean, that kind of honesty doesn't. That's what I learned from him. It's okay to have an opinion, but have a reason for the opinion and own up to it in front of the people that you're talking about. Well, if you don't mind, Myron came on with Sports Beat with Stan and I when he retired. And he said, "Gents, you guys were lucky that, just like I was, that he lopped on the Steeler broadcast starting in 1970, and they took off, to me, the greatest team of all time in the decade of the 70s. And Stan and I started on Sports Beat in 1991, doing the Penguin postgame show. They immediately win 2 Stanley Cups. He admitted he rode the wave of that success, and that part of the success of our show was the Penguins' success. So, I mean, if the Steelers would have stunk in the 70s, I think he was still good enough to have been interesting, but that certainly helped.
His talent would have eventually surfaced. It might have taken a little longer for him to catch on with the public, but he started his commentaries in 1970. Is that when? Or is that when he started his talk show in 1970? Whatever it was.
Yeah, talk show.
It was
I think
before
commentaries in 68, yeah.
So it was before the Steelers became big. It was right when the Pirates were coming on. But I think he would have eventually surfaced as the star he was. But certainly Super Bowls, 2 World Series, and a Pitt National Championship didn't hurt.
No, it hadn't. I mean, before the Super Bowl with the Rams, I mean, his voice goes out over the entire stadium by some technical glitch. I mean,
And
all that stuff helped.
They had the biggest terrible towel
Yes.
ever at
the
that
Rose Bowl.
Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How Clap on a hand for our 3 terrific Pittsburgh media members. Tom McMillan, Ed Bouchette, Gene Collier. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
We gonna take a break, Tara, or?
started writing again, and I love the blouse. Oh God, oh God. Don't groan. It's good to see you here. I'm okay. I don't know. I have to leave for India in 2 weeks, and I don't want to go.
You tell me that.
I've been twice. I don't need to go a third.
All right, welcome to the second portion of our show today. We're going to talk to some people. We're going to move on from the print media to broadcasting. It's my pleasure to introduce two people I've worked with most of my career and have long admired even when I'm not working with them. Sally Wiggin has degrees from Alabama and Michigan. And
Don't mention the Alabama.
And you wonder why she loves football. But she's in the Pennsylvania Broadcasting Hall of Fame. Just a tremendous journalist. We miss her on the air since she retired. Andrew Stockey, he's on the Steelers Hall of Fame Selection Committee. And both of these people sort of fit the theme that we're talking about today. People that have made a lot of their living in sports, but I consider much more well-rounded and not just in that. I mean, Sally loved doing sports in addition to news. Andrew's been, sort of a jack of all trades, sports director at Channel 4, but one of their most respected anchors as well. Talking about how broadcasting has changed over the years, I was thinking, Myron used to write me handwritten letters when Eddie Crow and I were doing the ESPN show. And by then he was retired, and his legs were bothering him, so he would drive around and he listened to us in the day. When we first started out in broadcasting, you wouldn't say hell on the air without getting into trouble. And as we all know now, that swear words appear on soap operas. So one day we used a couple off-color words in describing something. Myron sends me a letter and says, "Dear Guy," he says, "I very much enjoy listening to you guys today, but the putty mouth stuff that I've been hearing lately disturbs me, and if your bosses think that gets you ratings, you tell them from me, they're full of shit."
That would be Myron.
I still have that letter, but you guys worked with him and beside him. Let's just start off talking about the first time, because neither of you are from Pittsburgh, the first time you heard him and what your thoughts were.
I didn't hear him. I was thinking about it while you guys were talking up here with, you're so lucky to have seen Ed and Tom and Gene. They're brilliant, and we're so lucky to have them in this city. But I was just thinking, when did you first see Myron? And at that time, the radio area was in our newsroom. Do you remember? It was over in a corner.
Right.
Bob, what was his name?
Koppler.
Bob Koppler was there, and
Alan Bowl.
Alan Bowl. See, I can't remember the names. Alan Bowl, because I can see them. And Myron would walk in. He would get pieces of paper. He would look at the wire, and then I would hear this voice, and it wasn't really unusual, but he was this.
It was attention-getting, though.
It was attention-getting, and I wouldn't call him diminutive, but he was not a large man. I mean, he was. But then I started listening, and people started talking about him and who he was, and I'm like, what? Because I came from a place where news and sports were homogenized. And I mean, I started in the South simply because that's where my parents moved when I was little from New England and from Michigan. So, but there'd never been anything like that. And I thought, I'm not so sure I like this Pittsburgh because it's odd. And no, honestly, the first couple of weeks when I saw people like that who were, at the time I thought of them as characters, but what it turned out is they were brilliant in their individuality. That's how I would call Myron. He was brilliant in his individuality. He knew who he was. He never tried to be anything but he was also really old-fashioned. You talked about a letter. I was going to say this because I don't have a lot.
Yeah, because when he wrote those letters to us, email was around, texting was around by then.
No, he wrote me a type letter. And I remember I had it in, I don't know why I got it, but I was at an event where I was emceeing. It wasn't a big event. And I opened the letter up. It had been in my purse or something. And he was complimenting me. I'd already started doing the Steelers. And he was complimenting me because I was behaving like a lady. Elizabeth, Wouldn't that be him? That would be Myron. And I actually, some women today would be offended by that. But I was thinking my mother and father would be so proud. And he was talking about how he loved that everything that I had done and branching out into sports, but at the same time maintaining a ladylike appearance. Now, he never heard me in the newsroom later on. Today, I would be cited for my language. You know that guy. Yeah, and I have that letter, I saved it, and I cried, and some women would be offended by that. I was so flattered. And then when you asked me to speak at his service, it was one of the greatest honors I've ever been given in my career here. And I have to thank you and thank him because he was singular. I mean, he was really, that's in a world where so much is homogenized. I think Myron was singular, not just in Pittsburgh, anywhere he would have gone. That's why I asked the question of Gene and Tom and Ed. He would have been singular. I believe that, having come from somewhere else.
Andrew, one of our audience members was talking about Pete Franklin, and I'm trying to do the math. Was Mike and the Mad Dog a thing when you were living in Connecticut?
Yes.
I sometimes think as the Mad Dog is sort of like the New Jersey. There's Myron similarities there, but you were at ESPN before you came to Pittsburgh, correct?
I was at ESPN in production.
So what was your thoughts when you, the very first time you heard him doing something?
Well, I heard Myron, growing up, was a fan of NFL films, and I've always had an appreciation for the history of football. So I heard him doing all the Super Bowl highlight films, and my first thought was, okay, I guess that's Pittsburgh. It just was really odd, but it seemed to fit and flow with the highlight films, Super Bowl 13, Super Bowl 14. So not until I came here for an interview back in 1994 did I actually meet him. And it was funny, he was doing his commentary still at that point, and he did one that, it kind of told me what kind of person this was. He was over at Three River Stadium, the old Three River Stadium, and he was doing commentary, complaining about the paint inside the hallways in the lower bowl of Three River Stadium. So this is the home of the Steelers and the Pirates, and the colors in the hallway were cowboy colors. And he basically took a camera and walked around and pointed this out in his commentary. And I sat there, and his voice obviously was, it takes a little getting used to if you're not from here. Obviously, I was just interviewing here. But I was like, wow, that's really interesting. And then he went to, I forgot who, maybe he talked to, I don't think it was Joe Gordon at the time. Was Joe there in 94? The PR director was Joe Gordon. But
Yes.
he made a point of telling him in his commentary, talking, saying, look at these walls. These are cowboy colors. This is the home of the Steelers. Well, I'm sure the very next season, I know when I went down there for the first time, it was black and gold in the hallways. And for the first time, I discovered what this guy was able to do. He understood, I think, the whole idea of the visual medium in a way that perhaps some of us forget about today. I mean, he would paint a picture. He would talk, and he would say things. He had odd ways of saying things, but the visuals that he showed you made the point. And so I always thought that was really interesting and clever and thoughtful, and it told me this guy was more than just about his voice and UA and WA. He was a journalist. He was also somebody who could make things happen if he told a story and told it in the right way. And that story always stuck with me. I will never forget that. And from that time on, it's somebody I wanted to get to know. And I was very fortunate, even though he was done with TV by the time I got there and done with commentaries, I got to know him over the next 20 some odd years as a reporter at Channel 4, as a sports journalist, and I'd like to say, hopefully, as somebody who looked at him as somebody who inspired me to be better at what I did, to prove that the job you have, you can make a difference. Something as small as changing the paint inside a hallway, or maybe something larger.
You know what, Guy? Andrew said something that made me think. We use the word genius, brilliance too often now. I mean, so much is overused because there's so many types of media and everybody's making comments about something. But truly, there is no way that Myron adapts from print to radio to TV, knowing what sells in all of those different sorry, that was grammatically incorrect. You do not do that without being would love to know what his IQ was, because, we use the word genius too often. No, he truly was genius, because you can't write like that. I think there are only two writers, it was George Plimpton and Myron, who were not on staff, who at Sports Illustrated, I'm trying to remember.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's true now, but it was true. They were the only two that were invited outside.
well, Andrew, you talked about the clout that he had. If you, the sort of secret part of his career, the writing part of his career, the people, because of writing for the Saturday Evening Post, he did pieces on Howard Cosell, Cassius Clay, Mickey Mantle, stuff like that. And then later on, those, Ed Bouchette was mentioning, the only local radio show that Howard Cosell would come on would be Myron's. So that part of his career really set up the broadcasting part of his career. I mean, I worked with Myron closely and filled in for him when he was on vacation. And occasionally he would say, give me a phone number. He had this, Rolodex on his desk. And I went through there one time, and he had Howard Cosell's phone number in his apartment. He had Yogi Berra's phone number. So I went down when he wasn't working one day and started copying all these phone numbers down and kept them for
Oh, my
myself.
God.
But he carried a lot of clout. So by the time he was a Pittsburgh icon, nationally people knew him already.
Well, Sally made a great point about about genius. That's a term that we often throw around, but he really was. I mean, he learned how to do television, and as far as I know, he wasn't taught television. I mean, they said, okay, here's what you need to do, but he figured out, okay, how can I make this medium even more? And I think that's what he was able to do, whether it was the commentaries, whether it was the video,
Coproscope.
the Coposcope,
Oh, my
Yeah.
God. Who
With-
comes
with-
up-
with
who
the lab
comes up
coat?
with that?
Yeah.
Who comes
the
up
holiday
with that?
videos he did. The Terrible Towel was a visual thing, and that's what really made him unique and different. And it's hard to come up with things like that. I mean, you rack your brain for new ideas in the medium I work in now, and the hard part is you don't have the time. You really have the time to do it. He was able to take the time, create these things, and they became iconic symbols of him, the city, the football team.
I'm so glad you mentioned Terrible Towel. Tell me if I'm wrong. Was there any kind of thing that people waived before the Terrible Towel? Because when the Miami Dolphins
They had
went
some
perfect,
hanky thing,
did they
yeah.
have the hanky before the
They did,
Terrible
yeah.
Towel?
Yeah.
Okay, because was that the perfect Miami?
I'm
I
pretty
think it
sure when I
was
read the book,
after-
because I thought they discussed that, was it?
Was it after the Terrible? Because I think.
Because I thought when they discussed the start the Terrible Towel, Myron said the hanky thing's too wimpy. We want something that's more useful and everyday.
think the
So I thought he already was aware
So
of
you
it,
think
but
the
It
hanky
might have
thing
existed only
preceded?
because remember those 3 years they went to the Super Bowl? At some point, I think during that stretch they had something. Maybe that hanky did come out, but
what did Elizabeth Terrible Towel come out in '75? Is that right? Does that sound right?
75.
Yeah, I thought that perfect Dolphin season they did the hankies.
Speaking of the Terrible Towel, if I may, for a moment, Guy, we just finished a show last fall about the Terrible Towel. And Elizabeth was a very big part of this show about where it came from, the history of it, what it means today, the people that benefit from it. So I had a chance to spend probably about 2 or 3 months really learning about the Terrible Towel and Myron's place in it. It's a fascinating story. If you get a chance, if you go to our website, we have a segment called Chronicle, and it's broken down in about, I think, 4 or 5 pieces, chapters. And it really does tell the story about the towel, but the towel is it's about Myron too. And it's about him creating this symbol. And it became, and of course, had they not won that playoff game, we never would have heard about it.
Yeah.
But how the symbol became more than just a towel that you wave during a game, how it became part of the city's fabric, how it still benefits today, the impact it's had on the Mary Kay Allegheny Valley School. I mean, the amount of money it's raised for those residents who live there now. And how it's part of Pittsburgh. I mean, you go to hospitals, kids are swaddled in terrible towels. It is as much part of Pittsburgh as anything else. And it's something that he created years ago at a time where nothing like that really existed. In fact, it wasn't even, you told me, it wasn't even black and gold. The first towel really was it yellow? Was it a? He told people to just bring a yellow or black towel.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
Right. And the thing was, he had no idea what the response would be. No clue. From our discussions, he was somewhat nervous about, what's going to happen. And all of a sudden, they scored their first touchdown of the game, and out of nowhere come all these towels. And that was the beginning of it. And the interesting part about that story is he wanted to get the players on board. And guys like Andy Russell thought it was, it's gimmicky. We're not going to do that. A lot of the players didn't like it. He managed to get some of the secondary players to really to buy into it.
And now ex-players come out before each game and lead the towel wave. Yeah.
And you know, and it's so funny because one of my visions, oh God, and I remember where it was, was Andy with your father. The two of them were together. It was at an event in another city, and the two of them being really close and walking in to a room together. When you just mentioned that, I saw that where I went up to both of them and started talking to them. I remember Chronicle.
Yes.
I think I did a
She,
few of
actually,
those.
the Chronicle program I'm talking about, Sally was the original host and producer. She created the whole concept. And
Well,
what-
we never did that story. I think that's a fabulous
Yeah,
story.
it
I mean,
would-
we did so many different, but you know, people said, oh, they were saying, well, how can you do another one? Well, actually, I see one of our people, I'm not pointing, one of my favorite people standing in the back of the room. You're gonna have a lot better than us in just a few minutes. No, it was, Chronicle has done some wonderful pieces about the Steelers and about the entire culture of this city that's tied to, not just tied to a towel, tied to a team. And yeah, I think, I don't know, you could talk forever about this, and you could talk to ever. Where would you put him in the pantheon? I'm gonna ask you this, Guy. The pantheon of great Pittsburghers or people who had lived there. Jonas Salk, obviously. I'm thinking medicine, transplant.
Fred
Tom's-
Rogers.
Fred, oh God, Fred. Great friend, Fred.
And to some people, especially who aren't into sports, might think that that's a little ridiculous but in terms of what he meant to the city and the people that followed, it's a totally different thing to invent the vaccine that beat polio. But you know, Beano Cook's, Don Hennon was playing basketball at Pitt when Salk, I don't know if you guys know this story, and Beano was the publicist for Pitt. So Jonas Salk invents the vaccine that beats polio, and Don Hennon's one of the greatest basketball players. And Beano wanted to do a poster, and the title was Pitt's Two Greatest Shot Makers.
Oh, I think that's fabulous.
Jonas Salk wouldn't do it.
Oh, my
No,
gosh.
he
That's
he wasn't a
awesome. Oh, my
he wasn't a
that's
basketball
great.
fan. But I mean, Myron is up there with any of those people. Rachel
I would-
Carson, Andy Warhol. You know, I don't know.
I would say, and you know what? I would love to have seen Andy Warhol and Myron in a room together.
Oh my goodness.
Can you imagine? No, actually, do you know what? Myron's genius was so versatile. He could pull that off. He could, because he was as brilliant as he was a man of the people. And that's hard to pull off. I think that was Myron's gift, is because if you did sit down and talk to him, he didn't sound like the person. It's not that it was an act. It's that there were several different Myrons. Would you agree, Elizabeth? There are several different Myrons, and I was blessed to know all of us who worked with him, worked next to him, but also watched him. We got to see all of the iterations of that man.
He wasn't afraid to, have some fun along the way. I mean, I remember, I'll never forget this. I was the weekend sports anchor. I think it was my second year there. And they were shooting one of his videos for the holidays. And, I'm just sitting in the office working, and all of a sudden here was Myron in this, Matador outfit. I was like, that's not
Oh my God!
And I was
Oh my
like,
God! I
okay.
remember that
And
the
then
Macarena.
I see-
Oh my
I
God!
see
Was that the MC Hammer one?
No, this is the
No,
the
no, no,
Macarena.
no, Macarena.
And then I
We
see
did a
these
video of it.
four
Oh, Jesus.
beautiful women who look like models walk by. I'm just like, and of course they wouldn't let us in there while they were doing it. But I'm like, okay, And then I go back and I see the video. I mean, he's having fun with himself. He's making fun of himself. He's having fun with the whole thing. It was the Macarena, and I think Jerome Bettis was the subject of it. And I'm not going to sing it for you. You can watch it on YouTube, but it's very funny. But he had fun with himself. He basically, the terrible towel was part of it. He was able to joke around and laugh at himself.
What's the one he did where was his shirt open?
Oh, that was the MC Hammer one.
MC Hammer,
And
and
that was
he
the-
had these
baseball
chains
That was
on.
the Pirates.
Can't touch this. That's it. That's
Now,
right.
see, you guys were there with that. I
That's
missed
it.
that, but that is really funny.
Well, let me ask
No,
both of you.
actually, God, I wish we had that video. Oh my gosh, I'd forgotten about that.
I believe the last chapter in his book was titled "Where Is the Fun Gone?" or "It's Not as Much Fun Anymore." Sally, you and I are about the same age.
I'm older than you are.
Well, I was being diplomatic.
I think a lot.
My first 35 years in broadcasting, I thought I had the greatest job in the world. The last 10 was like working at a steel mill. I just was putting my kids through college. I couldn't wait till it wasn't fun for me anymore. And the kind of creative stuff, the funny, they would never let us do that today. Luckily, Myron had developed such a following that they couldn't say no to him. But do you agree? I mean, at your stage, Andrew, you still got some time left here. No.
So in other words, he's not as old as
You're still
he's
going to
not
be
as old as
doing
we
black and
are.
gold prime times and stuff. And can you have as much fun
You know,
with it?
you
The
can.
higher-ups don't want that.
See, no, I think you can if you have the right management group that's, basically directing you. I mean, we can't have the kind of fun that you guys had, that Myron had. We can't be silly like that and do videos and goofy things. We can have fun. I mean, I do a 4 o'clock newscast, which is much more loose, and we have fun. We joke around, and we do weather trivia, and we do baby gender reveals and stuff like that. We have fun. But it's a different time now. I mean, what we do
Baby
today,
gender reveals?
when Kelly Sasso, she's about to give birth, and she gave...
She is?
Yes. You didn't know this?
I just watch ESPN now.
Okay.
The only thing
I'm excited. It's my first gender reveal, okay?
Oh my, we're doing that?
Well, the 4 o'clock news we have...
You're doing that.
All right,
No,
but
you're not.
anyway, I'm going to
Oh
lose
my
my train of
God.
thought here. Because, I mean, news today is very structured. News today is much more, there's a lot to get in. We don't have the kind of time that you had at that point. I mean, you had a half hour of news, but you would block off, 5-6 minutes for sports. We don't have that anymore. It was a different time. We do commentaries, but it's our general manager who does those commentaries now. It's a different environment, but, you can still have fun. And I have to tell you this, I'm in the position I'm in, when I see Sally and when I see Guy and I think about Myron, it's a lot, because you're the one who's trying to keep that legacy going. I mean, they set such a high standard. And every day I go to
I
work
didn't.
Sally, you and I did pregame shows for 20 years. You set quite a standard. But, I mean, you realize when you go to work every day at Channel 4, you have people like Bill Hillgrove, who set the standard, and Myron Cope, and Guy, and Sally. And you have to keep that going. And it's an honor to be in your shoes and do that. And I always do think about the history that's been made from people who were there before me. And Myron is that one person, I think, above all, who's like, I want to do as good a job as he did. I may not have the impact, but the rules of journalism, the way to tell a story, I try to keep that in mind when I do my job today.
Let me ask you, notice how I'm starting to interview you.
Hey, I'm the MC here.
Do you think the product today is more homogenous than it was
Yes.
when we were there?
Yes.
Or do you
Well, I
think
can
we're
remember
just old and
no,
we're saying,
even-
ours had more room for
No, even when, I
personality?
can remember when we were doing, the three of us, a couple of black and gold prime times, I was a little more opinionated, because I was doing radio talker at the time, and if I said something negative about the Steelers, we'd go into a commercial break, and you'd be, or I'd pick against them. Let's say it's a Monday night game, I think they're
I would
going to
get
lose.
upset with you?
You didn't get upset because I can't believe you said that. Well, I mean, that's just, I think we've gotten away from that. I think everything's just a lot more homogenized.
It's just the nature of news. I mean, people tune in at a certain time to see certain things, and that's just the way it is. It doesn't mean you can't be an individual. It's hard to be a Myron Cope type of individual. I mean, as Myron, I'm sure.
Well, you can't force it. I mean, he is what he was, and you can't force that person. I said, I don't know what time you guys came in when we were talking with the writers. I said there are people that have had shtick and not much to back it up, and they usually fade out. And there are people that are very knowledgeable but don't have the personality, and they eventually fade. It's so hard to have both, and he did.
Well, what's interesting is that the person who was with him for so long, I'm looking at Elizabeth, was Billy in the booth. And you know what? I listened to them when oh God, I'm blanking on.
Jack Fleming?
I knew it was Jack and I couldn't remember Fleming. Does that mean I have a problem?
No.
But I can see but no, when Billy took his place and went in there with Myron, there wasn't a hiccup. And Billy was so smooth. And I remember a friend of mine, I worked with him when I first got into the business in radio. He became very famous as a sports person. I think he got fired a number of times all over the country. His name was Tony Bruno. Look him up.
Oh, yeah.
He was crazy, but he was also really, really brilliant and really good. And he taught me how to cover hockey. You know, I was married to a former college football player and former baseball player, but I had just gotten into hockey and watching it when I was in Birmingham, when they had the Birmingham Bulls. But anyway, so, and he once said, I was listening to Tony, and I think he was doing a national radio show, and he said that Billy Hillgrove was the greatest play-by-play person he had ever heard. And what was interesting...
Tony Bruno said that.
Yeah, Tony said that about Billy. But what was interesting is that style of his meshed with Myron so perfectly because Billy had a really wicked sense of humor, but he would let the zaniness of Myron encompass what he had. And that's why they were so great on radio and why so many people listened to the radio and turned the sound down. And turned the sound down on the television. I don't think they do that. They might, but I don't think they
We
do.
did the same thing. I guess Billy and Myron did the same thing on television for a time. They used to do this Sunday golf challenge, this 18-hole thing on Sundays. And, you know, the whole thing was for charity. And they would play a different hole every week at this golf club. I think it was like Seven Springs or something like that. But
It was Groat's place.
oh, it was Champion Lakes? Okay. It was
Yeah,
Champion
I
Lakes.
think it was
But
Groat's
what
place.
made this, it was every Sunday night, and I remember because I was anchoring the weekends, what made it interesting wasn't the golf or who would win. It'd be the back and forth, the banter, the way they played off one another. You know, how sometimes Myron might get a little mad if he was losing, you know. It was really kind of fun to see the two of them do that on television. But you're right, I mean, what they did on radio, that meshing. On TV, I got to see that every week, and a lot of people did with that golf challenge they did every Sunday night on Channel 4.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, I find it funny that, you know, at various times I've gotten emails or criticisms when I was doing radio talk that I was a homer. I've been accused of being a Penn State homer because I did their football show for 24 years. The three biggest homers ever in this city, to me, were Bob Prince, Myron Cope, and Mike Lang, and they're the three, they'd be on the Mount Rushmore if there was one. And what I loved about Myron, one thing that I thought, I spent 1 year out of Pittsburgh working at the network in Washington and New York and thought I was on my way to big-time stardom. I didn't want to cover the U.S. Open in tennis or the Cincinnati Reds in the playoffs. And Myron said the same thing. You know, when he had an opportunity to maybe move to New York and be a writer there, he said, you know, he grew up, he was a vendor at Forbes Field, I was a vendor at Three River Stadium, and he would sometimes sneak into the games, ditch his uniform, go up and just watch the games. And he said if he wasn't covering the Steelers or the teams that he cared about, you know, then he didn't want to do it. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that blatant cheer. That's what endeared him to everybody.
I don't like the word parochial because it has a negative connotation, but
Yeah, it reminds me of nuns in grade school.
But you know what? It's so funny how over time something that was considered a negative description isn't that. Today, I think people want to portray themselves as having some kind of roots or some kinds of home because everything is so homogenous. Well, it isn't. I think now they look at you if you're tied to a region, if you're tied to an accent, if you're tied to a home in sometimes a world that seems out of control. And you know what's interesting? The panacea for everything that seems to be wrong with the world is sports. I think sports is now more important than ever. So that's why I think an event like this, to look back at the history of sports in this city, you could argue that while as the city, I came here as the city, this is a horrible thing to say, I came here as the city was dying, began to die. I came here in 1980. By 1982, we had fallen. We were the 10th market when I moved here, the 10th largest market. They had been 9, 8, but then they started to fall. And then they call it the diaspora. Everybody started leaving in the next 3 years. By 80, 83, 84, we were 12. By the time I became the 6 o'clock anchor, we were 13, 14. You know what market we are now? 26, 25. But what has made Pittsburgh still this mecca is sports. And I used to think, you know, it's not CMU, it's not Pitt, it's not the education, it's not, you know, all the medical findings. It is sports, and it still is sports, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I used to, but now that I've gotten older, the only thing I do is sit there and watch sports. I think that that's a wonderful thing for Pittsburgh to be. Does that make sense? I mean,
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
yeah.
It's such a fun place to work.
And your father is one of the reasons that happened. I mean, he's one of the linchpins, that's what I would call him. He was a linchpin for the image that the city had.
We talked about the I see Joe Gordon's here now. Joe, do you remember the Miami Dolphins hanky thing? Did that precede the terrible towel? No.
Where's
Okay.
Joe? Wait, is that
Yeah,
Billy? Oh my God,
Joe and
there's Billy.
Hi, Billy.
I was pointing to that when I was talking about Billy.
According to, I looked it up, according to Miami, it started November 21st, 1971, by their radio announcer to see how many people were listening to the radio at the game.
Oh, and how many came with?
But it never took off like this.
No. Well,
God, you know, look, Billy and Joe look exactly the same. You know what? You don't look any different than you did 20 years ago. Of course, my contacts don't work that well.
Billy doesn't sound any different from when my
Oh,
mother
wait,
won a
there's somebody
birthday
else
party
I
off
see
him
in
on the
back of
radio.
room. I can see someone else.
Well, folks,
in
it's
the
pretty
back.
obvious that there are a number of unique people that I used to work with at WTA, not just Myron.
Let's talk about Myron's philanthropy, though. We've mentioned the terrible towel and the Allegheny Valley School, and they get all the proceeds from it. But I play every year in the Fazio Cope golf tournament, still bearing their names. We've mentioned that he's always been very generous with his time, signing autographs, greeting people at the hotel when the Steelers were on the road, but also very generous with his time in raising money for less fortunate.
Well, certainly, and the terrible towel in the Allegheny Valley School is probably the greatest example. During our program, we sat down and talked about the terrible towel. You know, his son Danny goes to the Allegheny Valley School, and as Elizabeth told me, he was concerned. You know, what would happen if he wasn't around to take care of his son, and he decided, since he created the towel, to give all the proceeds, or the majority of them, to the school. And he met with the CEO, I think Regis Champ, was that his name? Okay. And he went to Regis Champ one day, it's like 1996, 97. And he goes, Regis, I want to give you a terrible towel. He's like, okay, thank you very much. I have a couple in my office. He goes, no, I want to give you the terrible towel. And he said, all the proceeds from this will go to the school. And the impact it's made, how much is it now? Is it, how many millions? Do you remember? $7 million.
$7 million.
Since 1996, 97. I mean, think about that. From terrible towel sales. And you would think everybody has a terrible towel. Well, no, I mean, terrible towels come in all shapes, sizes, styles. In fact, we did a story with a group on the south side called Little Earth. St. Patrick's Day. So it's called Little Earth Productions. They're on Pittsburgh's south side. And they make the terrible towel. And the funny part about the story is, the towel actually was made somewhere else before they got the rights. It was made in Wisconsin for a number of years. I know, Wisconsin, terrible towel. They finally got the rights and they make it here. And it's a little shop, a little nondescript shop on the south side. They make them for holidays, they personalize them. They say if this team makes a Super Bowl run, it's 1 million towels in 1 year that they sell. It is remarkable what that towel has meant to that school and the residents there, the people who live there. And, you know, they appreciate the fact that people, you know, love the terrible towel and they have it, but they also want people to know that, you know, this is where it makes a difference. And this is where it makes an impact. And that's his greatest legacy. Not just the towel, but the impact the towel has.
Before the Super Bowl that they lost to the Packers, which we all covered in Dallas, a guy sent me a picture of the USS Pittsburgh, a submarine, which was in Crete at the time, and the entire crew was on the top of the submarine holding terrible towels. It was the week before the suit. So I used the picture in one of my sportscasts. So now that I'm retired and have no money, I joined the VFW because the beers are $2 instead of $7. So I'm sitting at the bar at the VFW one night, and this guy comes up to me and says, "Are you Guy Junker?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "I'm Howie Nagorski." And I'm looking at him like, "So what?" "Hi, nice to meet you." He goes, "I'm the guy that sent you the picture of the sub." And he was on a submarine in World War II and proceeded to tell me all kind of stories. But, I mean, the thing's been everywhere. The Great Wall of China, and that's an amazing legacy.
And what's great about the towel is, and I remember Myron told me this once, because you see the towel, treated like the sacred shroud of Turin. Are you allowed to like drop it? Do you have to treat it like the U.S. flag or whatever? And he said, no. It's a towel that represents Pittsburgh. So if you happen to use it in your kitchen, like I do, I use it as a pot holder. That's fine. Or you're trying to pick up water off the floor. That's fine. I think one guy during a special that you were in said it best. It's been through a lot of beer and a lot of tears.
Really?
Yeah, it was the Steeler Nation NFL film show. You don't remember this?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. They interviewed me.
Right,
Yes,
and they
they
talked
did.
about this.
And we talked about
Right,
it.
I mean,
yes.
as much as it's a
It was an NFL show. Yeah,
much as it
NFL
represented
show.
Pittsburgh, it's also a very working class object.
That's the one where I cried. They asked me
Yes.
questions and I cried.
See, I
cried on
I
NFL
did watch
films.
NFL films. Yes.
No, but you know what? I wanna bring this up too. One of the things that I loved about your father was his great love for his wife, your mother. People don't think of Myron in that way, but I remember I went to her funeral, and it was something he didn't talk about a lot, but you could see how much he deeply loved her. And it's really wonderful to have someone who is, I don't like to say behind the scenes, but she was like a rock. You would have to be to support someone of that genius, that brilliance, and she did it really well. I mean, you were, he was very lucky to have her.
Believe me, she was large and in charge.
Yeah, I mean, and it was clear when people were talking about her, when he was talking about her.
Guy, I did want to mention one last thing. I know we're getting near the end of our time. So as Guy mentioned, I'm on the Steelers Hall of Honor committee, along with Joe Gordon. And each year we select the members to go into the Steelers Hall of Honor, which is the team's Hall of Fame. This began about 4 or 5 years ago. And this year we selected Myron as one of our inductees. A lot of people were like, "Why didn't you do it sooner?" I said, "Well, we had a few players we had to get in there."
I was thinking the same thing just now.
All right. Well, he's in, okay. but anyway, it was really an honor to see him go in. He's the only non-Steeler employee in the Hall of Honor. He didn't work for the Steelers. He worked for WTAE TV and radio. And I know it meant a lot to Elizabeth for him to go in. It meant a lot to, obviously, those of us who worked with him. It was personally an honor to see him go in. Because his impact, you could argue, was as great as any player. Because, even though he didn't play. But what he did and the environment he created that exists to this day. I mean, everybody has a terrible towel. Does everybody have a terrible towel here?
I have a pink one. I have the pink one that came out for,
That's all Myron, and that's Myron's legacy, and that's our tribute to Myron every single game we go to, and really everything we do around football. But once again, he went to the Hall of Honor this year, and certainly deserving because of his impact on Pittsburgh football.
I see someone in the back of the room who you're going to hear from, who's one of my favorite players, one of my favorite people. And you guys are in for a real treat, so I think we probably need to get.
Well, let's
get the
see
heck
if
off
anybody
of
has any
this.
questions, as we did with the writers.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Any questions for Sally or Andrew?
Going on.
Yes.
Good question. But behind the scenes, I wasn't. They can both tell you, ladylike is not something you would describe of me in our
She
newsroom.
swears like a sailor.
Or, I am anything but. But, and when I read the letter, I thought, what person are you talking about? But no, I think it's not ladylike. He used the term, but I would call it grace under pressure. Grace no matter what gender you are. Being able to switch it on and off. You don't have, I mean, now some people like Mad Dog, you know, or Myron, but it's maybe it wouldn't have worked. Maybe it wouldn't have worked, but I, you know, today I watch some of the people and, you know, some of them I really admire and some of them are okay, but I'm glad what's happened that women are allowed to cover sports that are male dominated, and they do a really good job of it. Somebody that I love watching on ESPN, she's brilliant and she's really good. Mina Kimes, I don't know if anybody you watch, I think she's really, really good and she's super smart. And I didn't do it. I think I didn't strive to be that way. I just thought that I needed to be polite. And I will have to say, when I was with the guys, I did take a back seat most of the time, simply because they knew more about football. I had played baseball. I had married a Major League Baseball player who was retired. I had been a swimming coach and a competitive swimmer, so I knew what athletics was. I knew what the athletic mind was, but I couldn't say that about football. And so I would say I bowed to you. I didn't bow to you.
I disagree.
You did as much.
But you know what?
You did plenty. We talked about a
I
hard
knew
worker Myron
you know
was.
what? I'm going to say this, and some of the women here are
You
not
did
going to
your
like it.
homework.
I did my homework, but I knew my place. I knew my
I
place.
disagree. I completely disagree.
I didn't know my place.
That makes
No,
me
no,
feel
I
bad. That
disagree.
makes me feel like we put you in the back seat.
We were all equal in doing those shows. People, I think a lot of people, I mean, first of all, you looked the part, you dressed the part, people wanted to see what you were wearing because you had numerous black and gold outfits. But in terms of talking football, discussing football, talking about a game, and I've done post-game shows with you too, you never had to do that.
I want to tell you this, and I'll leave it with this. I'm not going to talk anymore because we need to see Rocky and Bill and Joe. There was a Facebook page, and it broke my heart. There was a Facebook page, and most of the comments on it came from women, and it was entitled, "I hate Sally Wiggin as a sportscaster." Yeah. It was early on, and I actually came off for a year. I went to the news director, and my boyfriend didn't want me doing it anymore. And I did what he asked. I came off of them. And then a year later, the news director came and said, "We want you to do it, to come back on." And, you know, to the guy, the boyfriend, ex-boyfriend now, I just said, "Oh, I'm so sorry I did that." I said, "No, I'm going to do it." But I don't know if you guys remember, I came off for a year.
I remember,
came
but
off
the
for a
show
year
wasn't the same without you.
because it was.
No,
really-
don't feel singled out. There was a I Hate Guy Junker as a sportscaster page too.
Anyway, so that's your answer.
But it wasn't the same without you.
Yeah,
You
well,
were,
that's
no, it
bad.
wasn't. That's why people watch. I mean, they want to get information, of course, but they also want to see you. They want to see the chemistry. They want to see the discussion, the input, the strange things we would say. That's what made it interesting.
Hey, Ben Roethlisberger wouldn't do an interview with any of us.
That's right.
He always talked to you.
Not bad.
He did,
So-
every year. He
Any
did.
other questions?
Every year. Now you're gonna see some really super duper people come up here.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
I don't miss working, but I miss both of you.
I can't get up. Now I see, no, don't help me out. Oh, he's like a football.
I just love being together again. This is fun.
Oh, God.
Sorry, we're not doing Steeler football anymore.
They say if you don't groan when you bend down, people can't tell how old you are. It's not possible. All right, sweetie.
Oh, goodness.
See you guys.
We went over.
No. Bernie's running the show. If everybody could take their seats, we'll get ready for the next portion of our program. We started with writers, moved on to broadcasters, and now we have our Steeler connections. And I can't begin to tell you how much each of these three gentlemen have meant to me in my career. First of all, Joe Gordon, who, as a public relations man, is the best one I've ever worked with in any sport at any college. When I was just a young punk out of Penn State, I was working in Beaver County, and we had a weekly Steeler report sponsored by the supermarket. It was like a 5-minute thing, and it's intimidating to walk into the locker room of that team and be that young, and Joe always hooked me up and treated me the same as he treated the Monday Night Football people coming in. He himself, working with all those Hall of Fame players, was a member of the inaugural Awards of Excellence class in Canton, Ohio. Joe Gordon.
Thank you, guys.
When I first started doing that Steeler locker room report, I would get out and interview fringe players, the long snapper, because I was too intimidated to go up and talk to Joe Green or Terry Bradshaw. But my boss one day said, "Hey, you got to get some big name players." So the first one that I went up to and got a one-on-one interview with, and he couldn't have been more gracious. I don't know how many guys have a Purple Heart and Super Bowls on their resume. We talked before about great people in the city of Pittsburgh, Rocky Bleier. And a guy that's been like a brother or an uncle to me, took me under his wing at WTA Channel 4 when I first got hired there, never talked condescendingly to me. I learned so much from him. He's still got the best set of pipes in the world. Pitt football, Pitt basketball, Steelers play-by-play, Pittsburgh legend Bill Hillgrove. I want to start with you, Joe, in something as Dan was sort of taking over for the chief. Myron was added. That was the early 70s, the timing of all that. It wasn't just drafting Joe Green and Franco Harris and Terry Bradshaw. Describe those early, because as a kid in the 60s, I rooted for the Giants because I had to have a second team to root for because the Steelers were so bad. So talk about that transition phase.
I came to the Steelers in 1969 in June. I'd worked for the Penguins in their first 2 years in the NHL. And the coincidence was that in 1969, Joe Green was drafted and Chuck Noll became the head coach. So I used to tell the story that three great people came to the Steelers in 1969. Two of them are in the Hall of Fame, Joe Green and Chuck Noll. And then as Guy mentioned, I got the Award of Excellence from Pro Football Hall of Fame recently. So that completed the cycle. But anyhow, in 69, things were pretty sad as far as the Steelers were concerned. They'd only had about 4 winning seasons in 40 years, and when Chuck came, he was very determined that you were going to build the team on defense. He drafted Joe Green as a first-round draft choice, and the Post-Gazette headline was, "Steelers draft Joe Who?" And of course, that became history. The sentiment in Pittsburgh was to draft Terry Hanratty, who was from Butler and was the quarterback for Notre Dame. But Chuck was determined that what he was going to do, and that was the start of the dynasty. And then those drafts, the next year, Terry Bradshaw and Mel Blount, the year after, and then also Jack Ham, and then of course the greatest draft in Steeler history, 1974, Lynn Swann, Jack Lambert, Mike Webster, and John Stallworth. The only time in history that 4 players from the same draft were inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And of course the rest is history.
When Myron was added to the broadcast team, did you, I think Ed Kiley was the guy that approached him. Did you have anything to do with that
That's a
decision?
fallacy.
Okay.
That
Okay.
really concerns me. The history on that was that Tom Bender had been doing the games with Jack Fleming. Jack Fleming, as Bill will agree, was one of the greatest broadcasters, both basketball and football. But anyhow, Tom Bender was retiring, and I don't know if you remember Dick Stockton was working at KDKA, and he wanted to do the Steeler radio broadcast. And I said to him, "You sure you're going to get the approval from KDKA because we're on WTAE?" He said, "Yeah, no problem in that." So anyhow, when Tom Bender retired, I went to Dick Stockton. I said, "There's an opening. You would do one half the games, and Jack Fleming would do the other half." And Stockton, who, if you know him, was a real egotist, he said, "No, I got to do the whole game." And I said, "Well, we can't do that because Fleming's been here. He's terrific and all that." And he said, "Well, I'm not going to do it." And I think what really happened was he could not get the approval from KDKA. So we had a meeting in Dan Rooney's office, Dan, Ed Kiley, and I, and Myron had just started doing the commentaries on WTA. He'd do about one in the morning, one in the afternoon. So we were in a meeting upstairs, and I said to Dan and Ed, I said, "Why don't we try to get Myron?" And the consensus was that was a good idea. So Dan said to Kylie, "Contact Myron, see if he'd be interested." And that's how it happened. A lot of people, and like I say, I'm kind of offended by this, that some people said it was Ed Kiley, and it wasn't, it was me.
Well, you got to understand, we work with the Kiley boys, so they tell stories about their dad.
Yeah, and so does Kathy Kiley. Tell that story that she discovered Myron Cope. And then the sidelight to that was when Mildred Cope, Elizabeth's mother, heard about that. She said, "Oh no, that voice, how's anybody going to respond to that voice hearing a whole football game with Myron Cope?" That was the history of Myron.
Rocky, did you grow up a Packers fan in Wisconsin? Was that who you rooted for as a kid, or were you a Packers fan?
Oh yeah, growing up. So I grew up in a small Midwestern town, Appleton, Wisconsin, and so the Packers in the '60s were the team to.
Was Ray Scott their play-by-play guy then, or?
Yes, yeah. And so the Packers were the team. Unlike today, I mean, it was a regional game. It was a regional game, and it was on television only in that area if they were playing. So yeah, so I remember going to the Packer games and I'd listen to the Packer games with my grandfather on his porch when that opportunity existed. But anyway, unlike the coverage that we have today, it was somewhat minor in that.
Well, in your time of listening to those games, or when you were at Notre Dame, was there a character similar to Myron associated with any of those broadcasts?
You can't compare anything to Myron. There's only one, and there's no other comparisons. So the problem is you're talking to as a player, you don't get to listen to the games or be a part of it, and so that's your focus over here in whatever goes on in the PR aspect of it, and the games is out there. So I can't really say if there was a unique voice, because there isn't any unique voice like Myron's, but that would do the broadcasting. So no.
Bill, time frame, you were a disc jockey at WTA when they hired Myron?
Can I tell you the story of the day I was there, part of history, when Myron Cope's broadcasting career began? I was a disc jockey at TAE Radio. I did the evening shift and was heavy on sports scores, and that's why I was able to keep the two hats on. And the boss called a meeting, and he said, "The morning show needs some help. We need commentary from a sports guy. Anybody have any suggestions?" Well, at the time, I thought Roy McHugh was the best writer in the city, one of the best sports writers in the country, and I suggested Roy McHugh. Newsman Ron Reininger said, "No, I got a guy I loaf with at Dante's down in the South Hills. He's off the wall. His name is Myron Cope. And that's where it began, because the program director, Don Schaefer, said, okay, we'll give Myron a call, you get his number, and the rest is history. He became a fixture at TAE Radio and, of course, launched his broadcasting Steeler game career. And before that was a great writer. He was always a great writer. But I was there for that moment, that seminal moment.
Well, Rocky, when you didn't get to listen to the games, obviously playing them, but when he was around in the locker rooms, did you guys get a kick out of him? Did you enjoy talking football with him, or how was he perceived in the Steeler locker room then?
So, and the thing about it was that, so Myron was received well. I mean, in the locker room at the time. I always felt this. So, when Myron was doing the radio show or his show, and he'd ask you to be on it, so that was a great privilege to be able to be recognized that you're going to be on his show, and so that was that I always remembered. In the locker room, you know, like all the media people, everybody had, you know, a question, and then another stupid question, and then a more stupid question that they would ask then thereafter, or the same one that they asked before by somebody else, and so on. But Myron always came up with a unique question of one nature or another, and it wasn't trying to beat. And he didn't have to write a story, but you know, it was part of what he wanted to get accomplished. So, but that was Myron. It was just unique in that regard.
Rocky, were you there the day that Myron was delivered as a present, a birthday present, to Andy Russell?
I'm sure I was, but I don't remember going.
Well, they sang Happy Birthday to Andy, and they brought this cardboard box in, and out popped Myron.
He did. Okay, I do remember that, sir. You're right. I do remember that.
Oh,
No,
my.
it wasn't.
I think it was a cardboard box.
Right, yeah, they couldn't get a cake.
But that's how. Yoy and double yoy.
Joe, I remember, I think Joe Green was shooting a commercial one time when I was in the locker room at Three Rivers, and they needed his shoulder pads, and you came in, and so some writer says to you, hey, where are you going with those, Joe? Joe Green needs them, and you pull them down, and you go, you know, whatever it takes. You probably don't remember, it was a little bit of it, just funny, because that's what Chuck would always say.
Right.
When, as you and Myron got to be tighter, did he overstep his boundaries at all and think he had special privileges in the Steeler locker room? Or?
No, I think he respected the situation, and he was by far the most creative person I've ever known. It was unbelievable with the ideas he would come up with. And as a result, he realized that he could only go so far with things and never cross that line. And I would say, and Rocky would probably agree, he was by far the most popular media person who ever covered the Steelers.
No doubt.
All the players related to him, and he related to them very well. And he had nicknames for everybody, and he'd come charging in if there was a story, and he'd take command of the place. It was like when they had these, if you remember, the runoffs for the clothes with L.C. Greenwood and Frenchie Fuqua. They would dress up, they'd have a runoff on clothes, and WTA would send a cameraman over, and they would do all that in the dressing room. And Frenchie, of course, had the shoes with the goldfish in the heels, and every year Frenchie would win, and Myron would be the sole judge of that, and it became an annual thing. It became very popular on TV.
And you had to be there. I mean, you had to be there. It was one of those locker room story. So you got to go back into the 70s and what was taking place and the dress. And Frenchie was always dressed, you know, and LC thought that he was one of those guys as well, but LC's like 6'5", you know, and so he would, so that we'd have this dress off, and it was after practice, and we'd have the dress off, and so it was like, we would judge, Myron would be there, so we'd come out with one outfit, and then we had other guys that thought they could compete as well, in the dress off, and they couldn't, but they tried anyways, and they all thought they had an ego.
And LC's nickname was Hollywood Bags, and he thought he was the nth thing when it came to fashion. But Frenchie destroyed him every day, every year.
That's right. Well, and so LC had, you know, established the fact with his gold shoes that he wore.
On the
Okay.
field, right,
Huh?
in the games.
In the games. There was a rule at that time that everybody had to dress the same. I mean, you had to wear the same shoes. You couldn't stand out in one regards or another. You had to have your jerseys tucked in. You had to have this. Everything was, and they would have people on the sideline
Right,
checking,
monitoring.
yeah, how it is. So, so LC would have his gold shoes, and he'd wear his gold shoes, and it was a fine. $500, I would say.
$100.
Huh? $100?
Yeah, that was big money then.
Yeah, $100. It was $100 fine for wearing the shoes. But he'd wear them the next day. Wore 'em the next day. And thank God the Steelers picked up the tab until they finally changed to the rules or whatever it was. But
Can you imagine that today with those restrictions? On what the players wear on the field
that's right.
today is
So
ridiculous.
Bill, when you took over for Jack Flynn, if I recall, you got that news right around the time your dad passed away, because
My mom.
your mom. It was a pretty seamless transition. As Joe mentioned, Jack was as respected and great. How much did it help that you and Myron were already friends? You already worked with him at WTAE.
Well, yeah, and we had 11 glorious seasons together with the Steelers, but people forget about that 12th season. 1983, Johnny Sauer, who did Pitt with me, had a heart condition develop suddenly in 3 weeks in front of the season. And so Ted Atkins, the radio boss, called Myron in and said, Myron, we can't have Johnny Sauer on the broadcast. Could you double up on weekends? He goes, I got enough on my plate. I've got morning commentaries, evening commentaries, TV commentaries, a talk show. I got enough on my plate. He said, your contract is up in January. I'm all ears. What do you And so they struck the deal that Myron would, join me on Saturdays with Pitt and then, do his normal Sundays with the Steelers. And under one condition, his favorite uncle or cousin, I can't remember which, was getting married. Was it cousin? It was his cousin. And that was on a weekend. I'll just pick a weekend, the third weekend of September. And he had to get from College Park, Maryland to the reception, which was at the prestigious Rolling Rock Club in Ligonier. And so they got a private plane and a grass strip in College Park, Maryland, 4 minutes to go in the Pitt, Maryland game. He left the booth, came out. There's a guy with a leather helmet. Are you Myron Cope? Yep, come on, let's go. And they take off. They're going up. It's a glorious sunny day. And they're up over the mountains and they're 20 minutes out of Latrobe Airport. And he asked for permission to land. And the tower said, are you out of your mind? We have an air show going on here. Hey, we got fighters and bombers and biplane. There's no way. He looked at Cope and he said, we can't land there. There's an air show going. He said, tell him you got a VIP on board. We have a VIP on board. Who is it? What's your name again? Myron Cope. Tell him it's Myron Cope. Myron Cope. 10 seconds of silence. I need 4 for the Cleveland game. The bombers, the fighters, the daredevils, the biplanes stopped. Cope landed and made his favorite cousin's wedding.
Joe, you had so much to deal with that team and the Super Bowls, and players respected. When I would watch that locker room then as a young guy, you had command. The players listened to you. I think it's sort of the other way around now with the players and the guys that have your job now.
Command. to Joe Green, hey, you, talk to Hillgrove.
Yeah.
He'd go to Bradshaw, hey, you, talk to Channel 11. You know, I mean, he was in command.
The way we were able to do all that was obviously the support of ownership. The Rooneys were so media-oriented and appreciated the value of the media. Then Chuck Knoll, who came from Baltimore as an assistant coach, and he had the attitude that the media had a job to do. He wasn't the greatest copy, but he had an open dressing room, and we had by far the most open dressing room in the NFL. And the players responded to it. They appreciated that, and it enabled me to do my job, and Chuck and the Rooneys had the attitude that the media was important and do everything we can to cater to them. So it made my job easy.
You know, talk about Joe's job. I think that it really needs to be discussed when we're talking about media and journalism and so on and so on. And, you know, back then, the staff was Mr. Rooney, then Dan Rooney, and then there was Chuck and his staff. There was Joe and Ed Kiley, Mary Regan, Buff Boston, that ran the whole show. Joe never not returned a phone call. He'd be there in the morning and interacting with all the media from across the world, and he would get back to that person that day. It was 6 o'clock at night, but he would get back. And it's amazing today, the Steeler organization now has 155 employees that run that operation, you know? And so you just have to put it in perspective. I'm sitting here listening to these two guys, you know, thinking, oh my God, you know? So one of the things I've come to learn is is a couple things. There's three things that happen when you get older. First one is that your memory goes. And then I can't remember what the other two are. But it's amazing that...
I'll tell you an interesting story. It was some period during the Super Bowl years, and the players used to have a meeting before home games at Three Rivers Stadium. And all of a sudden, I see Chuck Knoll walking past my office towards Dan Rooney's office. You know how you kind of sense
There's a storm coming.
Yeah. So next thing I know, Dan Rooney's in my office, and he says, the players are concerned that the media has too much access to us, the open dressing room and everything like that. And Chuck was there. And I said, can I talk to the players? The players were in the meeting room, and I went in there and I said, I understand you guys are a little concerned about the openness of the dressing room, the access the media has. I said, well, let me tell you something. You have the best media in the NFL. These guys, their job's a lot easier when we're winning. I said, but you're busy now, you're preparing for a game. I said, I'll meet with the captains on Tuesday. The players at that time were off on Mondays and came back on Tuesdays. So on Tuesday, I go to Joe Green. I said, let's have that meeting. He said, what meeting? I said, the stuff we were talking about on Saturday. He said, there's no problem, there's no meeting. That was the end of it.
Well, in the days before Chuck's weekly press conference was on the radio, the entire Pittsburgh media would be Myron, Jack Fleming, me, the Post-Gazette writer, Ed Bouchette, and we would sit in that little room around a table not much bigger than this. Chuck would, and we'd make sandwiches at the it was such a much more fun time. We'd sit around eating chipped ham sandwiches with Noel at the head of the table asking questions. It's changed, so now you have more reporters in the locker room than you do players.
And more cameras.
Yeah.
There used to be three, the three major TV stations, and now that's very much changed.
Let me ask you guys this. When Mike Lang retired recently from the Penguins, someone wrote that he probably had as much to do with the popularity of hockey and the Penguins. He may be one of the most important people in the franchise's history, next to maybe Mario Lemieux, Sidney Crosby. Winning the 4 Super Bowls in the 70s cemented the Steelers forever, and I don't know how much different it would be, but how much did Myron help just the whole culture of Steelers Sunday and everything during the week? I mean, he helped make them maybe even more popular than a Super Bowl champion would have been.
No question about it. He generated a lot more interest and enthusiasm. And of course, the towel is a sidelight to what Bill talked about earlier when Ted Atkins, who was the general manager of WTA Radio, they called him Mr.
Captain Showbiz.
Captain Showbiz, yeah. He came to Myron and he was concerned about ratings on radio, and he said, we have to come up with a gimmick. And Cope says, I'm not a gimmick guy. And he said something, well, I think your contract's due in another 2 months or something. And Cope said, I guess I'm a gimmick guy. And that was the genesis of the terrible towel. But no question, Guy, Myron contributed significantly to the popularity of the Steelers.
He's the only person that could have sold the terrible towel to the public. And even he was worried about that. But it all came to a head in that playoff game against the Colts in '75,
Right.
when Lynn Swann came out of the tunnel waving the terrible towel, and the towel was born, and like I say, only Coke could have been the father.
Well, Rock, like I said, the teams of the '70s would have been, remembered forever no matter what. But I think where I appreciated Myron more are some of the down years when the team wasn't so good. He still had a way of keeping people interested and enthused.
And to that point, his preparation was not only great, but it was vast. He would come into that booth with at least an inch and a half stack of index cards of preparation. And rarely would he get through half of it. So having noticed that after a couple of games, I said, Myron, I said, don't you over-prepare? He goes, Billy, there's no such thing. He said, what if we have a fourth quarter of one of those games that is what did he call it? Anyhow, a real dud. He said, I got to keep listeners and I got to keep them entertained. And he was prepared to do that with stories and references that had nothing to do with the game because the game was out of hand. If indeed it came to that. Unfortunately, for most of his tenure, he didn't have too many of those games.
On Sunday mornings, for a 1 o'clock kickoff, he would show up at the stadium. At 9 o'clock, he'd be in my office writing notes. It was amazing, his preparation.
You know, I think I also think that the one great thing, one of the things that had happened to at least spread it was in the 70s. So when Myron came aboard, but more importantly, as the team started to win, and ultimately as the steel industry and the coal industry started to go downhill, people here had to find jobs. And so they left, and they had to move. And, people say, well, the Steel Nation travels well. No, they don't travel well, they just live there. They say they don't travel to go to the games, but they live all over. And one of the, and Myron, and if I can say this, is that Myron gave him that sense of being in Pittsburgh. I mean, you talk about a Pittsburgh guy that somebody could be proud of, and they're listening or on the radio, wherever they may be, catching that game. And so there's Myron, and it's a part of home, and it's a part of what they, people can make fun of what they want, but not, not if you're from Pittsburgh. So, and the fact is that then the terrible towel became that standard, around the country. So the amazing thing is, even to this day, I think I've signed 356,142 terrible towels around that are still existing. So my hand gets retired.
No, I'm
Still-
sure.
You've contributed.
Rock, when did you know you would stay in Pittsburgh? Were you thinking while you were still playing, I want to make my home here afterwards, or did it just?
Well, no, my answer to that question is, and so you understand this, is that people say, well, how come you live here? Well, you have to understand this. You marry a girl from Pittsburgh, you ain't leaving Pittsburgh, okay? If you happen to drag her out of Pittsburgh, then she spends the rest of your life bringing you back to Pittsburgh. And so I thought that just easier to stay here, and so that was the reason.
Well, there's Pittsburgh guys, there's Pittsburgh girls, and I spent 1 year working somewhere other than here and hated it, so.
That's right. And the great thing about is, and I say this because as I had made mention before, so I grew up in Appleton, Wisconsin. It was a smaller version of Pittsburgh. And so it was a paper industry rather than steel industry. And so it was the same kind of values. And so you come here and it's just the same blue collar, hard nosed working, people that have settled here and made Pittsburgh the place that it is. And it's a wonderful place to be.
Bill and Joe, when Myron was doing things like the Christmas Carol, or when he come up with one of his ideas for a skit or something, did he confide in you too? Did he ever ask you, what do you think of this? Or did he just sort of take off and do it by himself?
Oh, no, he had an idea,
Right.
and he ran with it. No, he didn't consult anybody.
He was
no,
a runaway freight train,
Yeah, he hit the hole. I mean,
full speed.
yeah, I mean, it's the way he worked. And-
Although if you gave him an idea, he would run with it.
Well,
And it was amazing how he would develop stories.
how did the nickname The Bus come into being?
Right, exactly.
We're in Green Bay for a preseason game, and it's like the lounge area, and Jay Hayes, special teams coach, and that's the year that Bettis joined us in '96. He goes, "Hey, Bus," and boom, a couple times, "Hey, Bus," and finally I called him over and I said, "Jay, what's this bus?" He said, "Oh, that's what we call him at Notre Dame." So the game's the next day, and before the game, I said, "Hey, Myron, we got to start calling this guy the Bus because that was his nickname at Notre Dame." Well, you don't think he ran with it, do you? Oh, are you kidding me? The Bus, and the Bus was invented.
More people know Jerome's name by the bus than Bettis.
Exactly, exactly. Hey, Joe, please enlighten us with the story of how Myron got Frank Sinatra inducted into Franco's Italian Army. I think that is a classic.
Of all of his accomplishments, that was the best. It was traditional on away games that I would take the media to dinner the night before on Saturday night. This particular time, we're in Palm Beach, Palm Springs, California, preparing to play the final game in San Diego in 1972. And we're in a restaurant in Palm Springs called Mother Fletcher's. And it was a fairly large restaurant. There was like an alcove that you could see through the next dining room. There must have been maybe 5 or 6 of us there. And we look through there, and Myron sees Frank Sinatra with Ken Venturi, great golfer, and a couple of bimbos. And so Cope he says, "Give me a napkin." He writes a note to Sinatra. We're a bunch of guys, newspaper guy from Pittsburgh here for the game, and we'd like to, that was before he told him about the Franco's Italian Army. Anyhow, I think he just sent the note over. And Sinatra comes over to our table and he says, "How's the quarterback?" Meaning Bradshaw. Bradshaw had like an injury or something, and we gave him the information. And at that point, Myron says to him, "We'd like to induct you into Franco's Italian Army." And he explains to Sinatra what it is. And Sinatra says, "Well, it sounds pretty good to me." And we were practicing at a baseball park in Palm Springs at that time. And he says to Sinatra, be at the baseball park at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. So Frank Sinatra says, I'll be there. Meantime, he sends us 2 bottles of wine, very expensive wine. So I had to go from Palm Springs to San Diego to advance the game. And Jim Boston, who was our business manager, I was talking to him on the payphone outside the baseball park. And I said to Jim, I said, did Sinatra show? And Jim said, no, Sinatra didn't show. Sinatra taps him on the back and he says, Sinatra's here. They took Sinatra out on the practice field with the combat helmets. Tony Stagno and Tony Ventura flew overnight from Pittsburgh to Palm Springs to be part of the induction ceremony. Sinatra's out on the field, and Franco's very embarrassed. He's a rookie. It's his first year, and he's not caught up with all this, and it totally disrupted practice. So Chuck Noll said to Franco, get over there. And they inducted Sinatra into the Franco's Italian Army. It was his greatest accomplishment.
And I have to tell you this, Chuck was not necessarily pleased about having to cut practice and cut it short and interrupt practice and go over there to do this media.
But he realized it was hopeless. You weren't going to slow Cope down.
The power of Cope, the power of Sinatra.
Right, great combination.
Cope had a lot of clout. 95, we're in the Super Bowl at Sun Devil Stadium against the Cowboys. Cope and I take a taxi to the stadium. We get out of the taxi, and a voice in the car, getting out of the car behind us, yells, "They'll let anybody in here." And it was Chuck Noll. All right? Let's back it up till, well, they didn't let us in. We were there the whole week, but they wouldn't let us into the stadium till Wednesday. We walk into our booth. It's hermetically sealed. It is glass and closed. Cope starts complaining. Then he goes out to Joe Brown, one of the league functionaries, and complains some more. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, on the NFL's list of things to do and priorities, that's probably next to last. Super Bowl Sunday, we get out of the cab, we get in the booth. Half of the booth is opened up. My half. He's still behind glass. And he's, not real pleased. 20 minutes before airtime, a voice behind us said, "Mr. Cope, is everything to your liking in this booth?" And we turn around, and it's Paul Tagliabue, the commissioner of the NFL. That's the kind of clout that Cope had.
Joe did like the minor bird thing with Bradshaw's arm. Did the other players ever, in Rocky, you can talk about that. I think I read in his book that Lambert or somebody said he's turning this place into a circus. Did they resent it or enjoy it? I mean, that kind of thing breaks up the workday, doesn't it?
On the surface, they may have resented it like Lambert, who was a tough guy and all that. But deep down, they thought it was okay and they thought it was appropriate because it just brought more publicity and attention to the Steelers. But that was another one of his classics, that minor bird. Putting on Bradshaw's right shoulder, see if it would clear his sore arm.
Yeah, for you younger guys out there that don't know the story, the end of Bradshaw's career, and his arm was shot. Myron somehow got in contact with these people. This guy said he had minor birds that had healing powers, and he brought him in a locker room and put him on his arm. I could not see that happening today.
That was at Nets Stadium, Shea Stadium in New York, and Bradshaw played that game through his last 2 touchdown passes.
Right.
Yeah.
So part of that whole season, and I was working for WPXI at the time, so I was in the media, and so I would be with these guys covering the game or doing the press conferences and so on. So I remember at the beginning of the season, and Bradshaw had hurt his arm the year before. Okay, and so as I had understood the story, and we have to just go back in time, is that the Steeler doctor said, well, it'll heal, it'll just give it time and so on. Then he got another opinion and said, I can make it perfect from this other doctor, but you can't do anything for like 6 months. So Terry got the operation, and right before he came to camp, he threw one too many balls and re-injured it, right?
He went in Shreveport, where he was from, he went to some bone and skin clinic and had the surgery done instead of coming to Pittsburgh. And a couple of times I would talk to him in the offseason. I said, "How's your arm, Brad?" He says, "Oh, I'm really firing it." You know, so we had a mini camp in Pittsburgh, and he goes out on the field, he throws one pass. That's it, and he walked off. That was the end of his career.
So we're at training camp. So the first day of training camp, we're in training camp, and all the media guys were there. And so the first question was, "How's Bradshaw?" To Chuck. We're sitting around. "How's Bradshaw?" "Well, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see." So so the next day was, or on the next Monday, it was like, "Okay, how's Bradshaw?" "Well, he's coming along," and that's it. Anyway, by the third week, Joe came down and said, "Don't ask about Bradshaw, okay? Ask about the other guys, the backups, and so on, and what we're gonna do. Just don't ask about Bradshaw." I mean, and Chuck was so. So the preseason goes on, the season goes on, and so on and so on and so on. So as communications between Bradshaw and the team weren't going well, and he was coming in for rehab and so on, and he's sitting off on the bench, and that's not like him, and you know, and so he's not getting. So anyway, it's right before, it's in probably end of November, maybe into December. So I remember this, which was we had our press conference. I'm sitting in there, and in Chuck, you have to understand Chuck's press conference. Chuck will do this. He will give you the whole layout of what the press conference is all about. The defense, the offense, what needs to be done, so on. Covers all aspects. Well, then everybody's got a question. Well, then his answers become shorter and shorter and shorter after every question that is. So we're sitting in the press conference, we're going through all this, and it's coming to an end. Chuck said, "Any more questions?" Myron raises his hand. "What about Bradshaw?" And Chuck's response was, "He's close, but so is Christmas." And that was it, and walked out. Oh, that became the headlines, became the whole story. Oh, and Bradshaw was mad because Chuck said this and so on and so on, and then he comes back.
Another interesting story with Chuck and Myron. Chuck, they used to do Chuck's pregame show in Myron's home in Upper St. Clair on Saturday mornings. And the station put a studio in there, and every time something would go wrong in the house, like say if the air conditioning went bad or TV went bad, Mildred, Myron's wife, would say, "We gotta get this fixed." And Myron would say, "No, don't worry. Chuck's coming over on Saturday, he'll fix it." And he would. Right, Elizabeth?
He was our handyman.
Right. He was amazing.
If you would bring up any subject, mechanics, microphones, cameras, wine, aviation, he would be expansive. Gardening, but
Scuba diving.
As soon as you mention football,
Chuck, right.
that was it. Like, you couldn't teach him anything about football, and he knew it. Amazing guy.
Well, as things were winding down, Joe, I know Myron confided in you, and I think he asked you at one time to say, "If you know that I'm slipping, please tell me." Can you talk about sort of the last couple years?
Right. It must have been maybe 3 or 4 years before that. He said, "If you ever find that I'm not doing the job, please let me know." And that's how proud he was of his ability. So a couple of the marketing people from the Steelers told me one day, "You know, Myron's really losing it. He's making a lot of mistakes on the air, so forth and so on. So I said, okay, and I never listened to the games on the radio, even though Myron said, turn off the television, turn down the TV, and listen to the broadcasts on the radio. And I never did that because they were never synchronized. So I decided I'll listen to a couple games. And it was true, he was slipping and all that. So I called him one day and I said, I've got to come over and talk to you. So I came over and told him, I said, you know, you always told me if I was slipping to let me know. So I said, well, I think you are. He said, well, you said you never listened to the games on the radio. And I said, I never did until a couple of people suggested that I listen. He said, no hesitation, within 2 or 3 minutes, he says, that's it, I'm done. He quit on the spot. You really have to admire him for something.
And he
like
walked
that.
away.
Yeah.
They tried to bring him back. They brought him back to honor him. They gave him a seat in the press box, but when he was done, like Johnny Carson, he was done.
Bill, one last question. We'll open for questions. The funniest thing I ever listened to, I think it was a Bengals defensive back named Fakir or whatever his name.
No, that was New Orleans.
Okay. I thought Tunch was going to fall out of the booth. So
Well-
please relay that story.
Myron was big on pronunciations, and when he saw Fakir, he knew that being a native Turk, that Tunch could help him. So he says, I'm trying to pronounce this guy's name, David Fakir. And he kept saying different versions of Fakir until the wrong one came out. Unfortunately for everybody, or fortunately for the listening audience, DVE ran that thing the next 7 mornings. And, you know, he was something, but he was a stickler for pronunciation. And he told me when I'd miss one, he said, Billy, that guy's name is such and such, you know. But Fakir, and almost to the point where Myron knew what he was doing. He was going to take you right down that path, and he did it very well.
So I have a question just to all these young people that are sitting out here. Do you know who Nijinsky is? Very good, very good. You know, you've done your homework. So he was a ballet dancer and recognized as the greatest ballet dancer in the early part of the 20th century from Russia, and actually is from the Ukraine. But anyway, so my great, I think, claim to fame is so that I catch a ball in Super Bowl 13, and Myron goes, just like Nijinsky. And I didn't even know who Nijinsky was at that time, you know, and so I was thinking, and you know, how great. And it'll always be one of those things that I treasure, because it'll always be played somewhere down the line of showing what Myron's
Hey, I have a question.
terminology is.
Are any of you people in school on the Pittsburgh Promise? Just one? Anyhow, it's the most fantastic program ever developed in the city of Pittsburgh. Scholarships for kids who graduate from high schools in the city. I've been involved in it, and they've already given scholarships to 11,000 students, and they've raised $166 million. Most of it coming from UPMC. It's a fantastic program.
Where'd you go to high school?
That used to be Peabody, back in my day.
In the good old days, Bill.
Anybody have any questions for these gentlemen? All right, guys.
One thing I'd like to mention.
Sure.
If any of you want to know a little more about Rocky Bleier and his incredible story coming back from injuries in Vietnam, get the book Fighting Back by Terry O'Neill. to tell you the story. Unbelievable courage and hard work and just overcoming unbelievable odds. When I saw him the first time after he came back from Vietnam, I said, there's no way this guy's ever going to be able to play football. And the other thing, Bill Hillgrove, over 50 years doing pit, basketball and football. How many with the Steelers now?
It'll be 30 coming up.
Okay, it'll be 30. When they have Mount Rushmore in Pittsburgh, Myron Cope, Bob Prince, Mike Lang, and Bill Hillgrove.
That's right.
Thank you, Joe.
I mean, an amazing, amazing careers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take a short break, and then we're going to hear from Elizabeth.
Oh, that'll be a treat.
These legs don't operate like they used to.
I'm with you, Bill. I can barely walk here.
You guys, that was outstanding. So Christopher Salas, the new president of Point Park.
Oh,
And I grew up with you guys. So this was,
Where'd you go to school? Where'd you go to school?
Elizabeth Ford High School, Allegheny College, then,
Great school.
The Gators.
Gators, yeah.
Did you know John Meyer when he was
Yeah. John, I consider myself one of his mentors.
Oh,
Like,
okay.
I'm sure you are too.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
So when did you take over?
3 weeks ago.
Oh, did you? Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you very much. This was outstanding.
And what an impact that Point Park has
Yeah.
really made.
When Point Park had great basketball teams,
Yes.
Jerry Conboy was the coach.
Right.
I mean, they were really good.
Really good.
Playoffs now, both men and women.
You're playing St. Mary of the Woods.
I remember when they were NAIA baseball, crazy. They practice under the bridge. They're taking infield practice on the asphalt under the bridge. We come down and did a story. They didn't have a home field 20 years ago. Yeah. They were really good.
That's good. You're welcome.
Good seeing you, Ron.
You and I got way back early 90s. It was Marina. Marina.
Right.
Yeah, that's what it was called. And I actually, it's funny, I bought your hand-me-downs over the years. I'm not buying the car, motorcycle dealer. Well, it was your car, and then your Green Park Avenue. Right. And the other spot where it closed.
Did you really?
We met down at that arena. You'd be there on the weekends.
That's right, yeah.
It was like early 90s. I was just out of grad school. And I actually started a business across the road. So did you? I'm the chairman. I was the chairman of the also I was studying at the semi-retired management consulting. So, I started my business in Goldman Arsenal's Dirty Trust Company. I had a dessert. I had a partner there in an office.
You know, I miss that both. I mean, there's times I wish I could go. My business is in Carnegie.
So we're on the same block. Main Street, a green awning building. Yellow stucco, red painted brick.
Right. Yeah.
That's my company.
Oh, it is? Hey, Joe, good to see you. Same here. You look great.
I still own the company.
You still own the company? You got other people. Well, that's great. I'll do it. As a matter of fact, I'm going back over now.
Good to see you. Thanks so much.
It was nice to be asked. It was nice
So, thanks.
was here 8 weeks. I lived in the city for many years. I grew up down in Delaware. Walked out in the 70s. I even moved to Point Park because they had the journalism. I had to go to Penn State. In fact, I had classes with I was talking to them. We were in the same year, same classes. And I never told a school teacher here in Pittsburgh, so. You never know where you're gonna go. I decided I didn't want to do anything in sports for a career, because I decided it's my pastime, it's where I escape from everyday life. And if I got into it, then I would know too much how it operates, and it would be as fun, it would be my escape. Yeah. So I ended up being a school teacher and all kinds of sport events. Had enough money to go and lived in the city for many years. Didn't have to go. I'm going to talk to Bernie. I think it's better than it was last year. There's more people on Saturday. You would get more people your dad's age, my age, because we grew up watching or reading these guys and listening, and you get all the old timers. Yeah, I'm here to hear the anecdotes. And some of them I've heard before. There was an area here that said, with Myron Cope, Auckland's with Myron, Mike Lang, but you're young and old enough to know Mike Lang, because he just retired. I mean, he's from Utah. And Curtis has changed so much now. I don't know whether he lives there. But he used to be a talking about we were in high school, graduated, both of us graduated in 74 or 75. If you came to sports, you could come to the house, the main house. It was, everybody had my fun at the house. It's changed, but I think for the better. They're still in there. I don't think Indiana I go to all the meetings and I go Indiana, Pennsylvania. No, Indiana State.
If everyone could take their seats, please, we'll get to the final part of our Myron Cope Day program today.
That one, is it on?
We've been so lucky to talk to all the people that were here today, from writers to broadcasters to the Steelers connections. But I'm looking forward more than anything to hearing from Myron's daughter, Elizabeth, because she's got a perspective of Myron that none of us, we saw him as a professional and even as a friend or to have a drink or dinner with. I know I read in his book, Elizabeth, that you would get teased at school that people would imitate Myron Cope on sports. And
Yeah.
my kids would always hate that because they would get
They'd
Stan
say,
Guy love the
"It's
show.
Myron Cope on sports.
Right.
Yeah, and I would get really upset about that.
But
Yeah.
just to start off, you have to be, I would think, touched that 15 years next week that your dad passed away, and here we're having an entire day dedicated to him. A lot of young people here that never even really got to hear him or know what he was all about
Yeah.
are interested in your father.
Yeah, it's really touching. You know, his biggest thing in his job was job satisfaction and doing what he loved. And I always tell people going to college that they should major in what they love to do. I mean, he wanted to make a good living and support his family and himself comfortably, but it was more important that he do what he loved. And I think that you'll actually be more successful if you just do what you love and don't focus on, like, is this field gonna make more money for me? Or he always emphasized job satisfaction, and he always gave back and cared about other people, and I think that's why, you know, people remember him and honor him.
Well, just from a daughter standpoint, what was parent-teacher conferences like? I mean, could he ever go to something like that and be left alone, or be just considered like another parent or another dad?
Well, he was always working, so I mean, my mom would go to parent-teacher conferences, but there was a funny story that I ran into, like, one of my teachers just a couple years ago. She was like my third grade teacher, and I don't know if they make you do this then, but whenever you're sick from school, like, your parents have to write you an excuse, like, to take back the next day, like, why you missed school. And she said she'll never forget, my dad wrote me an excuse one day, and she said she showed it to the other teachers because they were all laughing. She wanted to get it framed. I didn't even know this. I was like in second or third grade, and my dad had written on the note, Elizabeth has no excuse. She's just a lazy bum. She wasn't sick. She has no excuse. And then he signed it.
Well, with
Myron Cope.
the schedule that he kept in the nightly talk show and traveling on weekends with the Steelers, do you feel you were robbed at all of spending time with him, or did you get to spend enough time with him after he retired? Or
No, he was such a presence in our house. It felt like he was always there, even though, like, he was gone a lot. Like, when he was there, he was there. Like, he was always pacing back and forth, going to his office. Like, he was very loud, and my mom and I enjoyed it when he went away to Steeler games. We had fun. But no, he was there a lot. He was home. Like, I mean, I don't know. He was a great dad. He really was.
Well, it's been a while since he's been on the airwaves. I mean, what do you think about when you can you separate Myron Cope, the sportscaster, Myron Cope, the dad? When you have thoughts of him?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, he was, you know, obviously he was both, and he was himself when he was on the air, and that was the real him, but also it was kind of like him on steroids, you know? I mean, he played it up, but, you know, he could also be serious and you know, low-key. But, you know, he was very down to earth, and, you know, he didn't put on any airs, and he certainly was himself in all situations. But he was always, you know, he was a wonderful father, husband. My parents had a great marriage.
When he talked about your mom, you could just tell the reverence that he had for her. Did you gravitate towards sports because of him? Do you like sports? Do you watch sports now?
I do. I love sports. I love football. Not so much when I was a kid, the older I got, and then like I would go to all the games, like, you know, in my teens and 20s. I mean, when the Terrible Towel came out, I was only 5. I mean, when I was like a really little kid, like I didn't understand or know, and like I remember in kindergarten one day we had to go around the room and say what our dads did for a living. And I didn't even know. I remember when they asked what my dad did for a living, I said he put on a suit and left. And I said he would come home later. And they'd say, well, what does he do, Elizabeth? And I'd say, I don't know what he does. He just gets dressed up and leaves, and then he comes home at night.
I'm interested to know, what did he have did he have a man cave? Did he have an office? What kind of stuff did he have hanging up? Pictures of him with players or anything like that?
Terrible Towels. And then, like, his studio was in our basement. But when he moved, like, the house I grew up in, there wasn't that much, like, really, on the walls. When he moved to, like, after my mom passed away, we sold that house, and he moved to, like, he had a house built in Mount Lebanon, and he had more on the walls there, like some awards and different things, I guess, that meant things to him. But it wasn't like plastered with stuff. You know.
Did you play any sports yourself in high school?
I was on the tennis team.
Oh, well, why do you say it with that kind of...
I don't know.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
Do you remember Chuck Knoll coming to your house? Or,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. He came over all the time, and he was good at everything. Like I said, he could fix things. He gardened. He gave my dad advice on roses, and he was like just... like if our stereo broke or like he was down there on his knees fixing it. He was amazing. A lot of people don't know that about Chuck Knoll. He never wanted to talk about football.
Well,
And he was real quiet too, like the fact that he opened up to my dad. My dad said it took 5 years to get to be his friend because he wouldn't talk to anybody.
Well, I think your dad wrote in his book, Einstein didn't want to talk to people about the theory of relativity either. But I mean, if you are a master of something, you don't want to discuss it with people that think they know it, I guess. In fact, Chuck came on Sports Beat with Stan and I when he retired. And while we were sitting around in the green room before the show started, I was scuba diving a lot then, and he used to like to scuba dive. And it's the most he ever talked to me in his life. He talked to me for 20 minutes without having to say another word to him.
Yeah, and when my mom passed away, his wife, Mary Ann, is the one that drove me to college because I had to get a dress that I wanted to wear for the funeral. And she was so gracious, and I was so devastated because my mom died quite suddenly. And I remember we drove in silence, and she didn't make me talk or anything. But it wasn't like uncomfortable. I just sat there.
She understood what you were
She
going through.
understood. She didn't try and make me have conversation, idle conversation. She just drove, and I sat there.
Okay, so when you're 5 years old in kindergarten, you don't know what your dad does. At what point did you start realizing not only what he did, but how popular he was in Pittsburgh?
Well, I mean, growing up, we couldn't go anywhere without people coming up, and I would always hear the whispers, like, there's Myron Cope, and people would come up and ask for his autograph, like when we went to dinner and stuff, and he couldn't go to the mall without, he would walk around like this.
Yeah.
Because he didn't want people to see him, and yeah, I remember one time, this is kind of weird, like, I guess he was in sweats or something, so they didn't, like, see him, or he might have looked bad, I don't know, but he went to Giant Eagle, and he was just, like, picking something up, and they had, like, a poster of him, like, at Giant Eagle, like, advertising hoagies. He goes up to the line, and they go to him, and he didn't really know how to grocery shop. My mom always did that, so they said, sir, do you have your stamps, sir? And he goes, stamps? What are you talking? He's like, they go, your stamps. And he goes, what stamps? And they go, your food stamps. And he goes, what? He goes, I can pay for my meal. They thought he was like some bum that like, and meanwhile his picture was right behind him, like doing a hoagie. He goes, I can pay for it. He didn't say I'm Myron Cope, but you know what I mean? They thought he was like, needed to get out food stamps. I don't know. I always thought that was funny.
It is funny. I am the guy on the picture there.
Yeah, a picture of him was right behind him, like holding a hoagie. And they were asking him for his food stamps.
No, I know, I think he,
I said, did you not shower that day? Like, did you not shave? Like what, yeah.
I know he was a bit, with Angelo Spagnuolo, the world's worst avid golfer. They used to have that tournament. I think sometimes your dad played badly on purpose to sort of further, no?
He wasn't very good.
Well, what I wanted to ask you is, what did he like to do when he wasn't working or watching? I mean, what was his passion
He
for
loved
relaxation?
Golf. He liked golf, and he liked to read. And we always took vacation. He enjoyed the beach. We
Yeah.
took vacations, and he would lay out at the beach, and we'd go swimming in the ocean, just, our family vacations. He enjoyed that, and him and my mom were like best friends. I mean, they talked about everything. Just being with her, they were,
She called him a show-off more than once, right?
Yeah, she did, yeah. She kept him down to earth, yeah. He couldn't put on airs around her.
What are you most proud of what he accomplished?
I don't know. It's hard to say. Just staying true to himself, I would say, and in everything that he did. And he always did what he wanted. He stuck to his belief. He didn't listen to anybody. I mean, even at home, like he stuck to what he wanted to do, even if everyone was against it. If he thought it was right, he was going to do it. And he would often. Him and I would get into arguments because I'd want him to do something. He'd say, I'm not doing that, or this is what I'm going to do. You don't tell me what to do.
How long did you live at home? Till when?
Till I went to college.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You brought a boombox there. You got something to
Yes,
play for?
I was gonna. This is Myron Cope Day. I thought we could hear from him directly. And that's why I was hoping some of the older people would have stayed, because they could really appreciate it, and just to get be interactive with the audience. I'll give you guys a choice and see if any of this would interest you. I have a small interview he did with Howard Cosell. I have one with Terry Bradshaw and Hanratty. I don't know if you guys even know who that is. Bradshaw and Hanratty. He was a quarterback. One on the plane after a Super Bowl with Lynn Swann. And then when he was a writer for one of the magazines, he interviewed someone, I just thought it was a funny one, some guy named Bo something. He was a baseball player, I think. Bo something, he was like from LA, like California. I don't know, but like the one with Howard Cosell is really funny. The one with Bradshaw and Hanratty is really funny.
Which
They're
one would
just
you
a
guys
few
like to hear?
minutes long.
Any preference? Lynn Swann on the plane?
Okay, let me try and find that one. Let's see.
Yeah, Elizabeth, I was touched because when he put together his greatest hits, the video thing,
Yeah.
there was a skit we did on Steeler Extra one night when he came back from a game that the reason they won was the reverse crab block. And I said, what's the reverse crab? And so we're in the studio, and he's wrapping up my arms and spinning around and showing me how this block works. So the way things have changed, and I had to call the boss and say, can we demonstrate this? We didn't
Yeah.
have the wireless microphones and stuff, and he included it on it, so I was tickled that was on there.
Yeah, some of these are hysterical. This one is just basically, well, you'll see. I've got to find it. I wrote down how to find it. Okay, it's number 5. Wait. This old-fashioned thing.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to hour 2 of the Myron Cope 25th anniversary special. The Pennsylvania Daily Lottery number is...
Wait.
Just gives you a warm feeling, doesn't it?
Sure, it was 1974. The Steelers battling toward their first Super Bowl, you betcha. They went into the playoffs that year. They lathered the Buff Bills in a playoff game, and then they headed out to Oakland to meet the hated Raiders. What a rivalry it was, to meet the Raiders for the AFC Championship. Now, the Raiders, if you'll recall, if you were around then, they were coming off a dramatic win over the Miami Dolphins. In fact, the media celebrated that game by calling it the real Super Bowl. They said here were the 2 greatest teams in the league by far. The Dolphins were eliminated by the Raiders, but here you had your Super Bowl, said the media. Well, in the locker room before that Steeler game against the Raiders out there in Oakland, Noel made a speech. Andy Russell describes it as the greatest speech Noel ever made. He said, real Super Bowl my eye. He told those players, the best football team in the National Football League is sitting right here in this locker room. Russell said those guys were so ready to go out and play football you couldn't imagine it. That speech had just moved the heck out of all of them. He told them what he thought of them, the best in football. They went out, it was a ferocious game. They beat the Raiders 24-13, which meant Super Bowl, here we come. It was a happy airplane ride, I'll tell you, going back from Oakland to Pittsburgh. And I don't ordinarily I almost never carry a tape recorder around with me, but I borrowed one from my pal Jack Fleming, my partner Jack Fleming, and I prowled the owl. And I interviewed this guy and the next guy, and also Lynn Swan.
And you have the feeling that the way this football game is going, the two defenses slugging it out, that a break could very well decide it. For example, a nice fumble here on this second down play at the 10-yard line.
All right, let's see what he can do now from his own 10-yard line. Park lines them up. Split end to the left flank or sent to the right side.
Wrong tape.
And here's
Wrong tape. Please remove that tape. That's a card. We're going to the tape again, not to a card.
Sorry.
You got the tape. Did I punch that? Wait, this is Lynn Swan.
This is an interview with Lynn Swan. All right, Lynn Swan, you caught the big touchdown pass today, and you're sitting here looking like you own the world.
That's right. In Pittsburgh, we own the world. The Steelers are on top, and we are going to have Super Bowl rings for the rest of the year. Now, I want to tell you, when I scored that touchdown pass, I looked at Terry and I said, Terry, I can beat him on the eye cut. I got him set up. Terry said, all right, we're going to throw it. But Chuck knows, sitting in two tight ends, and I had to leave the ball game. I came to the sideline and said, Chuck, I can beat him on the eye cut. Chuck looked at me and said, all right, we'll see what happens. They ran two other plays. We didn't score. Chuck looked at me and said, Swan, go back in there and run the eye cut. I ran in the game and said, Terry, I can beat him on the eye cut. Terry said, what? I said, call, full split right, 42. He called the play. I made 2 steps outside, broke across the middle, ran to the back of the end zone. Terry poised, waited to the last minute, fired one of the linebackers. I leaped up, caught in my hand, looked down the ground, tapped 2 feet in, and it was a touchdown. From that moment on, victory was ours. Pittsburgh was the happiest place in the world. There were 14 rookies on the team that started their season in New Orleans. We went back again this year, and we beat them. Beat New Orleans in New Orleans, and we're going back a third time for the bowl, and the ring shall be ours. Hey!
And after that speech by Lynn Swan, what do you think of him, Glenn Edwards?
Well, Myron, I think, with Lynn tongue, I think Lynn is still on the tee.
But that was the one with Lynn Swan.
See, one of the great things about the players trusted him and liked him. Lynn Swan wouldn't have given that interview to a lot of guys. Wouldn't have acted like that or, had a good time with it.
Yeah, he has a funny one with Bradshaw and one with Howard Cosell. That one is hysterical.
Can we listen to a little bit of that one?
Yeah. The older people will really get a kick out of it. I was hoping Bill Hillgrove would stay or, but they didn't know.
Do you pull this out once in a while and listen to it?
I do, and sometimes my friends get bored. They're like, they don't get it. They're like, oh, it's so long. I'm like, it's funny. They don't get it. They don't understand. Okay. They don't understand Howard. Wait.
So what in blue light?
Wait.
Well, way back in 67, that was a year before I accidentally got into this broadcasting business and was still writing for Sports Illustrated, as you may know. The magazine asked me to do a profile, a 5,000-word lengthy profile, on a sports announcer named Howard Cosell. And Cosell at that time was well known, no question about that. In fact, his show was being syndicated, his radio show, around the country. But he hadn't quite made it up to the top rung yet. He hadn't gotten over the top. He would indeed. But in any event, he had not as yet. So I went in there to New York and spent about a week with Howard Cosell in his office, in hotel bars and where have you. And then I went home and spent, I guess, about 2 weeks writing the piece. And then each day, I might tell you, and as a matter of fact, I was telling this story to Doug Hirth on Monday afternoon. He had me on his afternoon show to talk about the upcoming anniversary special, and somehow we got into this story, but for those who didn't hear it, during the approximately 2 weeks that I was at home back in Pittsburgh writing my piece, I got a call from Cosell every day asking, how's it coming? Will it be a masterpiece? You certainly have a topic worthy of a masterpiece. I say, it's coming okay, Howard. Takes a little time. It's coming okay. So, all right, finally, I finished the piece, and finally it is published by Sports Illustrated. No phone call from Howard. I was not surprised at all. I expected that to be the case, I tell you, because, you know, you write a piece, you write it objectively, you write the good sides and the negatives as well. And I knew he would be stunned by the negatives. Howard's ego being what it was, he was probably always sort of went through life, and I say this in good humor because I like the man, but he sort of went through life imagining that there were no negatives to Howard Cosell, none at all possible. So no call from Howard when the story comes out, when the story hits the newsstands. And Beano Cook, you know Beano Cook, here in Pittsburgh and with ESPN, he was at that time the sports publicity man for ABC television. So I got a call from Beano, and he says, Howard is steaming. I said, don't worry about it, Beano. Beano, no doubt, was avoiding him, you know, running wherever he heard Howard coming, because as publicity man, you know, he ain't supposed to get Howard publicity that Howard don't like. So I says to Beano, don't worry for a minute, Beano, because what's going to happen now is as Howard walks down the streets of Manhattan, people are going to be calling out to him, hey, Howard, saw you in Sports Illustrated. And it will sink in. And he will be on the phone to me within a few days, Beano, so don't sweat it. Well, sure enough, within a few days, there's Cosell on the telephone saying, this piece will be the making of your career, Cope. This is undoubtedly your finest effort, but then you had a subject with whom you could not help giving your finest effort, but this will be the making of you, diminutive one, for that is what he always called me, diminutive one. So Uncle Dokel, so I knew Howard down through the years after that, and I do tend to think that piece in Sports Illustrated put him over the top. It did indeed, and he took it from there, and of course, you know, he went on to be the inimitable number one force in sports broadcasting. Whether you liked him or not, you had to give him that. But anyway, of course, part of his fame was doing the Monday Night Football game with Don Meredith and Gifford and whoever came afterwards and blah, blah, blah. And so there was the Steelers were playing a Monday night game. Darn, what year was it? Well, I don't remember. But they were playing a Monday night game to be televised by ABC, of course. And I was doing my radio show, my Monday night show, from the booth, from our broadcasting, our WTAE broadcasting booth. And Dan Rooney, the Prexy of the Steelers, he and Cosell were to be my guests that evening. Rooney never got a word in edgewise, never got a word in edgewise. It went like this. Cope on Sports on WTAE from Three River Stadium, where at 9 o'clock the Steelers and the Raiders go at it. I have with me Dan Rooney. We've been talking here with Don Meredith. The Don's gone off, and his chair has been taken by none other than we have the august presence of Howard Cosell with us. And good evening to you, Howard. It's nice to have you back in Pittsburgh again.
This has to be the greatest moment of your life. A family sports writer once had the privilege of interviewing me, and now to seek to engage in verbal badinage with me with the squeaky voice, the diminutive body, you are maybe smaller than Mayor Caligiuri, who is the smallest mayor in the history of America.
I didn't cut myself tonight. What do I need with badinage? What is this, anyhow? Listen, you know doggone well that, you know, my having had the privilege of writing about you made my, you know, made my career.
Well, it gave you a start. Unfortunately, it never worked out.
If I may skip the bandage,
And the bandage. And get the badinage. Let's get the words correctly. If you're a writer, you must enjoy, and Mr. Rooney insists on it, grammatical correctitude.
Well, you see, Howard, what I am trying to do here is play dumb just as a courtesy to you.
It won't be a new role.
Oh, all right. How do you come back from that one? You win. You win. I was about to say, Dan, that earlier this evening he said, there's Myron Cope with his usual ebullience. And, you know, I had to point out to him that the word is ebullience, but he's been getting away with that on numerous Monday nights. And yes, you dealt me the death.
Come on,
all right.
You're a good kid.
Let's talk some football here, if I may, okay? I mean, I realize it's a subject with which you are not very conversant.
I wish I had the education and the talent of the sports writers of America. Guttural illiterates in the media trying their best to find a way to strike at Howard Cosell, lacking the education of an Ivy League institution, not a member of the faculty of same, meaning Yale University. I would give anything to have their totality of ignorance, which they manifest every day.
Well, you were so persecuted by the press. Why is it, as I started to ask you before we came on the air, why is it that years ago when I wrote that article about you said, all I want to do is get up enough money so that I can leave this jungle and retire to Florida.
That's
so,
right. Now
well,
I've
you're
done
still
it.
working on it?
Now
what
I've
are you
done it.
retiring to? The Taj Mahal? You buying a governor's mansion or what? Are you saying you're about to retire?
You know,
You heard it here, folks. First on Cope on Sports on WDA. Don't anybody cheer.
Myron, don't be bitter. I wish, as a matter of fact, I discussed with my wife turning over all my earnings, directly or indirectly, whatever the source, to you in a tax-free trust. Because there is a feeling in this very great city of champions that you must be taken care of.
If you turn that over to me in a tax-free trust, do I have to acknowledge that I'm really your child?
If you are Myron, you've got the scoop of the century. By the way, I love that jacket. I never thought I'd see it again. They buried Capone in that.
Some football talk if we make chance?
You'd better get out soon, Myron, because you got little chance.
Some football, do what?
Those of you that are younger,
I know, they don't get it.
Howard Cosell, Monday Night Football had some of the highest rated programs in television history back then when there were only 3 networks. And Howard Cosell was so enormous, people hated him or they loved him. There was no in between. And they would run highlights. This is in the days before ESPN and 24-hour networks dedicated to sports. They would run highlights at halftime of the Monday night game of about 4 or 5 NFL games from the day before. And when the Steelers were not included in that grouping, the switchboard, people would call Channel 4 thinking they were going to get through to Howard Cosell at Channel 4. And people would call and complain that the Steelers had to be on there. But you can't imagine what a giant, and Cosell had a law degree and was a very intelligent guy, used a lot of big words and turned people off. But the two of them together, that's magic. That's absolute magic.
Yeah, the one of him with Bradshaw is funny too, and Hanratty, because apparently they had made a joke like before they went on his talk show that they were going to just say no comment to everything that he said.
Oh, okay.
And do you want to hear a little bit?
Sure,
Okay,
sure.
I'm sorry. The young people are probably getting bored, but I have to. It's just hysterical. I was laughing because Bradshaw was funny. Oh my. Okay, let me see number 2. I mean, this is what the kind of fun they had back then. They don't. Media doesn't get to do this now.
No.
Okay, wait.
If we did, I wouldn't have retired.
Wait. Yeah, listen to the music. It's. Raising the issues, raising the spirits, raising your voice. If it matters, you'll hear it. You're in touch. Turn to the spirit of Pittsburgh. This is the place that you want to be. We're the spirit of Pittsburgh. WTAE. we'll just fast forward.
So, Uncle Dokel, here we go again. We're in the year 1975, picking up where we left off on Monday night. And, you know, in those mid-'70s, it was an annual custom for me to have Terry Bradshaw, the big stud quarterback, and the backup quarterback, Terry Hanratty, the Rat as he was known by teammates, the quarterback from Notre Dame fame, and as I said, Bradshaw's backup. It was an annual custom for me to have them on this here talk show. And these bums would conspire against me. They would scheme against me. So here we were in 1975, and, you know, it turned out that their scheme this time was to give me the silent treatment. Yeah, Hertha would treat these guys like their Royal Highnesses. She'd have a big spread out for them, bologna sandwiches and this and that. One year I think we had a little wine that they spilled all over the board here, as we call it, you know, where you punch calls up and everything. I was fearing of getting electrocuted. And they would carry on like a couple of madcaps. And now their scheme, as it turned out, was to give me the silent treatment. And, you know, how would you like to be stuck as a talk show host with two guys giving you the silent treatment that, you know, you're going to interview for, I don't know what it was, an hour, I suppose? Well, so here we are in 1975 with the Bradshaw and a Hanratty.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, Myron Cope on Sports.
Hello, everyone. Let me open this show. Will you let me out this? Now, look, good, let's settle down here. So put that jack in that hole there so that we...
Put that jack in that hole. Come on, don't be hard on Myron tonight.
Will you let me open? This is... Hello, everyone. And another session
Turn it down.
of Myron Cope on Sports.
Get the knob on the right-hand side, that's it.
Well, I guess you can guess it. I'm an Abner back.
I can turn... Hey, Myron, where's the mayonnaise for these sandwiches?
Well, they are nice sandwiches, aren't they? Calvin was so thoughtful tonight. He put out a nice tray here and
There's no mayonnaise or mustard, though.
Well, that's all right. In Louisiana, they don't have that.
Yeah, they do.
So you're just like back home. Yeah, it's Cope on Sports on WTA.
Dang.
Now, look here. I want to read a news item here, so please be quiet.
Hey, I know what it is. I bet it's Joe Namath. Joe Namath, the World Football League.
Joe Namath.
He turned him down. Turn him down. That's fantastic. Way to go, Myron. Way to go. What else do you have in this news?
Super This date line is New York. It came in late this afternoon. In case you missed it, Joe Namath has turned down the World Football League's reported offer of $4 million.
We just told him that.
Well, anyhow, the owner of the New York Jets says that he has offered Joe the highest salary ever paid in the National Football League.
She's left you on one or two.
And well, all right, look here. Last year, Bambino Perilli is coaching the New York Stars of the World Football League. He tries to get you, Bradshaw, to sign with them. And here's a guy who's been a nice pal of yours as your quarterback coach. He tried to get you too. That's right, Hanratty. Both of you turned your backs on the poor guy. Now he's in Chicago with the Chicago Wind, and Namath is his old teammate in New York, and he turns his back on a Bambino.
Not so loud, Myron.
There is no loyalty. There's no loyalty. Hey, wait a minute. I've got to get organized here, and I think that I'll just pause for this message. Dobosh Service Center in Pittsburgh. Well, I'll tell you, I ought to give some kind of a high-class introduction to my guests tonight. And my first guest, well, nobody's ahead of him, first, second. But anyhow, one guest in the studio tonight has just come back from cruising the Caribbean, where he was contemplating aboard ship the bondage that he is in. You know, he wants to be traded, but he's in bondage. So to contemplate this terrible problem, he took a trip through the Caribbean, and I must have a high-class introduction for him.
Oh, that's gorgeous.
Yes, he sat on the top deck, thinking about this bondage that he's in. Shackled. That's what he is, shackled. They won him in 19 ports of call, and the Steelers had and guest here tonight is a fellow who has just come north. What are you talking to me about, Hanratty? What are you pointing at?
Shut up, Myron. Keep going.
My other guest in the studio tonight is the fellow who just rode north from Big Cane, Louisiana. Grand Cane, excuse me. Where he punches cows on his, wherever it is.
He doesn't punch cows.
He punches cows on his 400-acre ranch, and he has galloped into the studio tonight. Also, I might point out to you, still nursing his lifetime ambition, which is to sing in Grand Ole Opry, yes.
Grand Ole who?
He comes to us sans beard. Sans the beard that carried him to the Super Bowl championship. Yes, indeed, he comes clean shaven. That's wonderful. We wanted to make you at home, Terry Bradshaw. Yes, we want to make you fellas at home with the little familiar music.
We shouldn't be here then if we want to be at home.
That's right. Well, what do you think about this Joe Namath turning down the World Football League?
I don't know.
What do you mean you don't? No, seriously, what do you think about that? It came as a sort of a surprise to me. I had the feeling he was going.
Personally, I have no comment to make.
Now, look here, we're doing a show, and I'm asking you a serious question. If you have some thoughts on this matter?
None whatsoever. No, I don't have any either.
Well, what am I going to do here tonight? Now, look here, let's be serious now. Wait, would you like a piece of bologna?
Have some take home, my kids.
A piece of bologna.
You are a piece of baloney.
My feeling is that maybe he doesn't think he could count on that.
It's better with his baloney in his mouth, doesn't
Well,
he?
we're going to call the show off or what? Am I going to go to the telephone lines or what? Are we going to talk here for a little bit?
Go ahead. I'd love to talk to you, Myron.
What about this Namath thing? I'm sure people are interested in knowing how you dope out this situation. You guys have both had
Who you calling a dope?
You care to discuss this matter?
Terry, it's a mouthful. The only guy who know how to put pickle on a sandwich.
You guys really haven't made, you know?
How you get that?
Quarterbacks really haven't made.
Three of us struggling, trying to make it in life.
Sonny Jurgensen, at age 40, has finally let go. He's being paid $120 grand a year. Finally let go, and the World Football League still wants him. Here's Joe Namath. The World Football League, in order to try to get him, changed their rules so that you're not allowed to spear the quarterback, you're not allowed to blindside him, and you're not allowed to touch him while his arm's the least bit in motion. Well, you're not going to say nothing? You have no... You guys came in here in a conspiracy to say nothing.
We came here to have lunch. I thought last time, when we were on last year, I thought we were going to have something to
Now,
eat.
this is ridiculous.
Had a good meal
If this is your idea of a joke...
Was this a commercial for the Samurai?
Yeah, they're one of our sponsors.
Great place. Folks, if you've never had any good food, go on down to the Samurai tonight. See old Wuchi Nachi out there and tell him I said hello.
Do you guys care to have a show here tonight, or what?
That's our main purpose for being here.
Well, okay.
Oh, by the way, can we make a comment before we get going, Myron? I doubt if we'll ever get going, but you can make a comment. Steelers tonight upset the coaching staff.
In what?
16 to 15 in our annual softball game. Deciding call was in the bottom of the ninth inning with Jerry Moon Mullins at bat, 2 outs. Was it one on base, Rat?
One on base.
One on base, 2 outs. The Moon's got a 3-2 count. He pops up to Fatty, who's our pitcher, George Perlis. Fatty George Perlis drops it after Moon runs at him full speed without going on the baseline. Fatty George drops it, Moon's on. Then yours truly steps up, pops a triple to right field.
It was an error. The ball was dropped.
It hit so hard he couldn't see it.
Who was out there?
Who was out there, Rand?
Steve DiNardo.
Steve DiNardo. No.
What? DiNardo from the
It was the umpire.
When he got thrown out in the 7th inning.
Yeah, Jack Hart threw me out.
Interesting. This is so interesting.
I'm on third base. Chaz Knowles covered me on third base. I slide it and knock him out there to carry him off on the stretcher.
Yeah, you knocked out the head coach.
That's
yeah,
right.
I
Yeah,
can see
sling
that
to it.
happening.
Anyway, I want to apologize for doing that right here publicly on there. And then anyway, followed that came Dwight White with a smashing single, which right past Dick Hoke, who made an error on it, and I scored, and we won the ball game. And
You get the idea.
Yeah.
They had fun. It's not like that today.
No, you know what? I read in WOI that even one time Chuck said to him, he was all upset at the weekly coaches taping. He wanted to tape it over something. He said, but today you're going to walk on eggshell. A lot of times today they want the questions ahead of time before you even, you can't do stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody have any questions for Elizabeth? Well,
Raised his hand.
yes.
Mario Lemieux came over, and he even ate dinner with us that night, and that was when he first came to Pittsburgh. He was very, very shy. I remember he didn't speak a lot. He was only like 18 at the time. I was like 12, I think. And yeah, like so I remember Mario Lemieux, all the stuff, Franco Harris, Joe Green, Bradshaw came over a lot. He would always bring his dogs with him. He had 2 little dachshunds. And that was way before anyone ever did that. Like now everyone brings their dogs everywhere. But back then that was like in the 70s. So that was like kind of odd. And I'm trying to think, gosh.
So you probably grew used to these people
Players,
parading in and out of your
football
house.
players in and out of the house. And hockey players too, and baseball players. Roberto Clemente. He stayed at his house in Mexico a lot. It was way up high on a hill. His wife was so gracious. Trying to think. Greg Lloyd. I mean, he was a later player. Chuck Noll came over once a week.
You guys lived real close, right?
Yeah, he lived like 10 minutes from us. But yeah, and my dad, like I said, he always put job satisfaction before money. I mean, he gave all our money to charity. So, we didn't live wealthy. I mean, I don't want to give anyone the false idea that we were like these rich people in this huge mega mansion. We had a very middle-class 4-bedroom house. I'm not wealthy. I live in a townhouse, and he would always say, like, if you're fortunate as we are, you have a responsibility to give to those who are less fortunate. And he always had the feeling that, like, if you had enough to live comfortably, everything else was extra, and that you should help other people out. And he had a big heart, and he often, he gave money away. He gave things away, and he was the kind of person that, if he found out a friend was in trouble, he was there to help. And he gave his sisters money. He would always say, do you need anything? Like, can I help? And almost, I would have to say, to his own detriment. He would give when he didn't have. That's the kind of person he was, which is not many people like that. I'm not like that. I mean, that's the way he was. And I think that's why he's remembered. It's not even so much like his broadcasting, of course it's that, and his writer, but the kind of person that he was. I mean, like I said, I couldn't be that kind of person even. I mean, he was really always deeply concerned about other people. I mean, he had a fun side, but he was also a softie, Oh, I have a degree in speech pathology. I often wish I'd gone into sports and journalism, and that's why I say people should do what they love, because I think I was afraid to do that, and that's one of my biggest regrets in life, because I didn't choose the proper major. I have to say, that was really dumb of me, and I always tell my friends that have kids that are going to school, that's like the biggest decision of your life, is what to major in, because that's what you're going to do for the rest of your life, and you better choose what you want to do. And don't let anybody tell you can't do it, or they'll say there's only like 1 person in a million become like the big broadcaster, and everyone else makes peanuts, and things like that scare people away when they have a dream of what they want to do. And I always say, don't let them do that. Like, I think I didn't choose the right thing because I was afraid I might not be successful, and I was afraid, like, I wanted to be sure I had enough to live on, and I just think you just have to go for it. And if you have a dream and you envision yourself, whether it's like you want to be a movie star, I mean, go into acting, and like they'll say, oh, you're probably going to end up just as a waitress in New York, because like who, only 1 in a million becomes like a big movie star. But I'm the kind of I truly, because of the mistakes that I have made, I truly believe if that's your dream, just go for it. Even if you fail, at least you can say you tried, and you won't have any regrets like I do. Yeah, you don't want to live with those regrets of like what could have, like maybe you would have been successful, maybe you would have done it. So,
Yes.
Yeah, not at my age. The media, especially as a woman, are you kidding? You see the anchors on TV, they're in their 20s, and it is youth oriented. So you guys you're seated in the proper position. They want young people that are attractive, and I mean, you don't have to be attractive, but I shouldn't say that, but you know how it is with television. But they definitely want young. It's young. You guys are the ones they want.
Hey, my last couple of years, I was drinking coffee at 10:45 to get through the 11 o'clock news because I was gassed by then. Anybody see the irony in the Myron Cope's daughter's a speech pathologist?
And it's funny because, this is just something I'm admitted. I didn't really love doing that. I always wanted to do journalism and communications and broadcasting, and as Myron Cope started, you would have thought that I would have done that. I don't know, I was just like an idiot, and I wasn't confident enough, and that's my thing, and I'm very envious of you guys that are going into that field, because I just think it's an amazing field. And I just hope everyone is successful, and there is a place for everyone. If you want it bad enough, it'll happen. I believe that. We're both very stubborn and opinionated. We often, went head to head. We fought a lot, and my mom was the peacemaker of the house because we were so much alike. But, after she passed away, I had 14 more years with just me and my dad, and we became very, very close because it was just me and him. My brother's autistic and nonverbal, so it was me, my dad, and my brother. And we would bring him home on weekends. He's in a group home. But it was basically just me and my dad.
Elizabeth, how much do you think your brother's situation caused your dad to be so compassionate and generous? Do you think it...
Well, I think he was always compassionate and generous because he grew up with nothing, no money. His family, it was during the Depression. He didn't have any money. Nobody ever gave him a cent. He used to love to tell me that. No one ever handed me anything on a silver platter. He had to work 3 jobs from the time he was 12. His success was never because family members were wealthy or anyone gave, the only reason he got to college at all is because he had an academic scholarship. He didn't have any money at all. He lived at the YMCA. He couldn't even afford a car till he was almost 40. He had to walk everywhere. So he did it all on his own, and he had hard times. And then obviously having my brother be born with autism was a major blow, his only son. That was a catastrophe. So yeah, there are ups and downs in life, and he handled it well. And I think definitely my brother being that way is started his work with charity, which was a big part of his life. It was almost a full-time career on top of a career. It was like working for the Autism Society and the Allegheny Valley School. And I didn't like that he gave all our money away. But he would always say, oh, I know you're selfish. He'd say, you want it. But he said, it's my money. So, the older I get, the more I understand that. But trust me, I'm no saint. But I had visions of being like really rich myself. But, but the older I get, I get it. That's who he was. He helped other people, and a lot of people benefit from that money as opposed to just like one person. So.
Anybody else? Well, Elizabeth, it's been a pleasure getting to know you over the years. I still play in the Cope Fazio golf outing every year. That money goes to autism. That we talked about the terrible Tau, and it's a great legacy, and you should be very proud that 15 years almost to the day after your dad died, we're still celebrating his life and how much he entertained us and how much he gave to the community.
Thank you, yes.
Bernie, you want to say a few words to close out? No? Okay.